Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I never thought a simple trip to the farmer's market could turn into something so unsettling. It started like any other Saturday. The sun was out, the air crisp, and I was in the mood for some fresh produce. I had just finished picking out a few apples when I noticed a new vendor in the corner of the market. He was standing behind a small booth, covered with all sorts of homemade jars and bottles. The sign said something about fresh jams, sauces, and a variety of pickles. I wasn't in the market for anything like that, but I thought I'd stop by and see what they had. Maybe I'd grab a jar of jam as a treat. The vendor, an older man with a thick gray beard and glasses, smiled at me when I approached. "Would you like to try a sample?" he asked, his voice friendly but with a tone that was a little too eager. I wasn't sure at first. I don't usually take samples from strangers, but it seemed harmless enough. The market was always busy, with people milling about, chatting with the vendors. It didn't feel like a dangerous situation. So, I smiled back and nodded, accepting a small spoonful of what he called his special peach chutney. The taste was good, better than I expected. The sweetness mixed with a bit of spice was interesting, but nothing I couldn't make myself at home. "Not bad," I said, smiling politely. He seemed pleased with my reaction. "I'm glad you like it. It's a family recipe, you know," he continued, his voice low and somewhat intimate. "I make everything myself, all by hand." I nodded, still standing there, looking around at the other booths. I didn't want to seem rude, but I also didn't want to get caught in a long conversation. "Have you been coming to the market for long?" he asked out of nowhere, his eyes narrowing just slightly, studying me. I was a little thrown off by the question, but I answered anyway. "Oh, yeah, a few months now. Just started coming more often." He smiled again, but this time there was something unsettling in his expression, something I couldn't quite place. "I see," he said slowly, as if processing my answer. "Do you live nearby?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. His questions were getting a little too personal for my comfort. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to get trapped into some long conversation where I felt obligated to answer more. I tried to give a neutral answer, keeping it vague. "I live just a few blocks away," I said, offering the most general response I could think of. "Anyway, I think I'll pass on the jam today, thanks for the sample." I turned to leave, but as I started walking, I realized he wasn't going back to his booth. He was walking just a few paces behind me. I thought maybe he was just walking in the same direction, but then I heard his voice again. "You know, there's a nice park just down the street," he said. "I've seen you around here before. Do you go there often?" I looked over my shoulder, surprised that he was still following me. "Ah, no," I said quickly, feeling the unease rise in my chest. "I usually just walk around the market. Not much of a park person." "Ah, I see," he replied, as if studying my every word. "What do you usually do when you're not here? Do you work around here?" At this point, I started to feel trapped. The questions were coming too fast, too casually, and I realized I didn't know anything about this man except that he sold jams and sauces. I picked up my pace, hoping to get away from him without making it obvious. But he matched my pace, staying just a few steps behind. "Just work mostly," I said, trying to sound calm but feeling my heart rate pick up. "I'm in marketing. Nothing special." "Marketing, huh?" he said with a strange laugh. "I bet you deal with a lot of interesting people. you meet anyone unusual?" I froze for a moment, my steps faltering. The question felt too invasive, too personal. It wasn't just a casual inquiry. It felt like he was digging for something. His voice had taken on a different tone, more probing, more intense. I didn't answer. I couldn't think of anything to say. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I looked ahead and saw that I was getting close to the exit of the market. If I could just make it to the parking lot, I could get in my car and leave. I picked up my pace, but now he was too close, and I could feel his presence behind me, like a weight pressing on my back. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't stop myself. I glanced over my shoulder again, and this time, his smile was gone. His expression was neutral, but there was something unsettling in the way he was looking at me, like he was waiting for me to say something, to give him an opening. I didn't know how to get away. The market wasn't that big, but there were still too many people milling around. I thought about ducking into one of the nearby shops, but that would just put me in a confined space with him. My stomach twisted in knots as I felt more and more trapped. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I reached the exit of the market. I quickly walked out into the parking lot, my eyes scanning for my car. But before I could make it to the safety of my car, I heard his voice again. "Don't forget to check out my booth again next week," he said, his voice too smooth, too knowing. "I'll be here." I didn't even turn around. I just kept walking faster, not stopping until I was safely inside my car, locked the door, and drove away. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, and I couldn't stop thinking about how he knew too much, how he followed me, how his questions had made me feel like he was studying me, like I was a specimen for him to analyze. I haven't been back to the market since then, and I can't shake the feeling that he's watching me, waiting for me to return. I don't know why he followed me or what he wanted, but I don't plan on finding out. I was walking home from my friend's house late in the evening. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was low, and I knew I needed to get back before it got too late. I usually take the main roads, but that day, I decided to cut through the alley behind the hardware store. It saved about 10 minutes, and I'd walked through there plenty of times before without any problems. The alley wasn't long. You could see straight through to the other side where it opened back onto the street. There were a few dumpsters and some old wooden pallets leaning against the walls, but it was mostly empty. I didn't feel nervous at first. I was just focused on getting home. I was about halfway down when I heard footsteps behind me. They were close enough that I knew they weren't just someone passing through. I glanced back and saw two men walking toward me. They weren't running, but their pace was quick, like they were trying to catch up. One of them was wearing a dirty gray hoodie, and the other had on a leather jacket that looked way too heavy for the weather. They didn't look like anyone I'd seen around before. "Hey, wait up," the guy in the hoodie called out. I stopped but kept a little distance between us. I thought maybe they were going to ask for directions or something. When they got closer, the guy in the hoodie smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. "Don't you remember us?" he said. "We've met before." I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Sure we have," the guy in the leather jacket said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking a lot. "You were with your dad at that car shop last month, right? You had the blue jacket on." I hadn't been to any car shop recently, and I didn't even own a blue jacket. I told them they must have me confused with someone else, but they didn't back off. "Nah, it was definitely you," the guy in the hoodie insisted. He stepped closer, cutting off the path ahead of me. "You're just playing dumb." I started to feel uneasy. My heart was beating faster, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I don't know what you're talking about. I need to get home. The guy in the leather jacket moved behind me, blocking the way I'd come. I was stuck between them. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" he asked. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, just talk," the hoodie guy said. "What's the rush?" I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out and make it obvious I was calling for help. I felt trapped, and the alley suddenly seemed a lot longer than it had a minute ago. The guy in the hoodie stepped even closer, invading my space. "You live around here, right? We've seen you before. You're always walking this way." That made my stomach drop. If they really had been watching me, I hadn't noticed. I told them again they had the wrong person, but my voice was shaking now. They knew I was scared. "Relax," the leather jacket guy said. "We're just being friendly. You don't have to act all stuck up." I took a step back, but it didn't help. The hoodie guy matched my movement, keeping the distance the same. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. "You think you're too good to talk to us?" he asked, his tone sharper. I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again. The leather jacket guy pushed off the wall and started closing the gap behind me. I was running out of space, and they both knew it. "Let me go," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked. "Go where?" the hoodie guy said, almost laughing. "We're not done yet." My hand was in my pocket now, gripping my phone, but I was too scared to pull it out. I felt like if I made one wrong move, things would get worse. "Someone's going to come through here," I said, hoping to bluff them. "This is a busy street." "No one's coming," the leather jacket guy said. "Why do you think we picked this spot?" That's when I panicked. I bolted to the side, aiming for the small gap between the hoodie guy and the wall. He grabbed for me, but I twisted away and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back, but I could hear them shouting and their footsteps pounding behind me. The other end of the alley felt like it was miles away. My chest was burning, and my legs felt like they might give out, but I didn't stop. I burst out onto the street, nearly colliding with a man walking his dog. I shouted for help, barely able to get the words out. The two guys stopped at the edge of the alley. They didn't come any further, probably because the street was busy enough that people would notice. They just stood there, staring at me, before turning and walking back the way they'd come. The man with the dog called the police for me. I was shaking so much I could barely explain what had happened. When the officers arrived, they took my statement and walked me home, but they didn't find the two men. They told me to avoid the alley from now on and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I don't think I ever will again. Even now, every time I see someone walking toward me, I feel a spike of fear, wondering if it's them. Wondering if they'll remember me. I didn't think much of it at first, honestly. It seemed like a typical stop, a little roadside stall selling fresh fruits and vegetables. My partner, Emma, and I were on our way back from a weekend road trip to the mountains, and we had been driving for hours. We needed a break, something to stretch our legs, and a small part of me was hoping for some fresh peaches or cherries to snack on as we continued the drive. The stall was tucked away along a quiet stretch of highway, just outside of a small town. It wasn't a particularly busy area, but it was the perfect spot for someone to sell local produce. The man behind the counter looked to be in his late 40s, with a thick gray beard and a weathered face that told the story of a life spent outdoors. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans, and a pair of old boots. Nothing too unusual, nothing that made me suspicious at first. We approached the stand and started browsing. There were baskets of tomatoes, cucumbers, and green beans, and the smell of ripe fruit filled the air. It wasn't anything fancy, but the produce looked fresh, probably picked that morning. Emma was already eyeing a bag of apples when the man spoke up. "Good choice," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "But you know, I've got a much better selection in my place. If you're looking for something real special, I can show you." I turned toward him, half listening, still looking over the apples. "Oh yeah?" I asked, just to be polite. He nodded eagerly, his hands clasped on the counter. I've got all kinds of stuff at my house, peppers, squash, berries, you name it. It's just a little ways down the road. You two look like you've been driving for a while. Might be nice to get a little break and see what I've got." I glanced at Emma, who had stopped looking at the apples and was now staring at the man. She had a strange look on her face, the kind of expression that made me pause. She didn't say anything, though, and I didn't want to overthink it. People make small talk at roadside stands all the time, right? But something about his demeanor rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't anything specific at first, just the way he was leaning forward over the counter, almost too eager. His eyes seemed a little too wide, his smile a little too practiced. "We don't need anything too special, really," I said, trying to brush it off. "We're just looking for a few things to snack on." The man's smile faltered for a second, but then he quickly recovered. "Oh, I understand. But you know, most people don't get to see the good stuff unless they come out to my house. You won't find anything like it anywhere else." I felt Emma's hand on my arm, her fingers tight, like she was silently telling me to hurry up. I looked at her, and there was a nervousness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. She was usually the calm one, the one who made me feel safe, but now she was the one who seemed unsettled. I forced a smile and nodded. "Maybe next time," I said, starting to step back from the stall. But he didn't back off. Instead, he stood up straighter, his expression shifting. It wasn't angry, no, it was something colder, more calculating. He stepped out from behind the counter, his hands still resting casually on the wooden edge. "I'm just trying to offer a little something extra. You two are welcome to come see it, no pressure. It's not far. I'm sure you'll like what I've got." At this point, I could tell Emma was getting nervous. She took a half step backward, trying to distance herself from him. I looked around, but the road was empty. No other cars were parked, and there weren't any other people in sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were alone here, too alone. I wasn't sure what it was, but something about this whole exchange had my spidey senses tingling. "Thanks, but we really should get going," I said, stepping closer to Emma, trying to pull her gently toward the car. The man's smile stayed, but it was different now. It wasn't friendly anymore. It was almost like he knew something we didn't. He took a step toward us, but I held my ground, my hand reaching for Emma's. "You don't need to be so hasty," he said, his voice dropping just a little, and the calm tone seemed to carry a bit more weight now. "I'm just offering some fresh produce, and you two look like you could use a good rest. You could take 5 minutes, maybe. Just a short drive." That was when I felt it real unease flooding through me. My hand tightened around the car keys in my pocket, and I could feel Emma's pulse quicken beside me. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but we're fine. We don't need your help," I said firmly, hoping to end the conversation. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, his lips pulling into something that wasn't quite a smile anymore. "I'm just trying to offer a better deal." A good place to stop. You're making a mistake. I could tell then he wasn't just trying to sell us fruit. He was trying to get us somewhere. I don't know what his plan was, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. We're good, thank you, I said one last time, and I grabbed Emma's hand, leading her toward the car. We didn't look back as we walked quickly, and the whole time, I could feel the man's gaze on us. I opened the door to the car, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door behind me. Drive, Emma said in a low voice. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. I didn't question it. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the parking space. As I turned around to head back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, watching us, his posture stiff. But this time, there was something else in his eyes, something dark, like he knew exactly what he was doing. I didn't tell Emma right away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just narrowly avoided something bad. We didn't talk much for the next few miles, both of us lost in our thoughts. Emma kept glancing at the road behind us, like she expected to see his car following. I was hoping I was just being paranoid, but part of me knew better. It wasn't the first time I'd seen someone who looked harmless at first but then turned out to have much darker intentions. And I wouldn't make that mistake again. I'm just glad we got out of there before it was too late. The parking garage was almost silent, except for the soft echo of my sneakers against the concrete. It was late, probably around 9:30 p.m., and I'd stayed on campus longer than planned, finishing a group project in one of the library study rooms. Most of the other students had left hours ago, and I was eager to get back to my apartment and unwind. I wasn't nervous, not at first. I'd parked on the third level of the garage, which wasn't unusual since the lower levels fill up quickly during the day. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a dull yellow glow over the rows of cars. My little blue sedan was parked near the far corner, and as I approached the staircase to head up, I pulled out my keys, dangling them between my fingers like I always did. It was a small habit that made me feel safer, even though I'd never had a reason to feel unsafe here before. About halfway up the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. Not loud, just the faint scuff of shoes on the concrete steps. I didn't think much of it, after all, other students used this garage too. But when I glanced back, I saw a man a few steps below me. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, his hands tucked into the front pocket. I didn't recognize him, but that wasn't unusual either. This was a big campus, and lots of people parked here. Still, something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he kept his head down, his face partially obscured by the hood. Or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't heard anyone else in the garage until now. I picked up my pace a little, trying not to overreact. He was probably just another student heading to his car, and I didn't want to make myself paranoid over nothing. But as I reached the third level and stepped out into the open, I realized his footsteps were still behind me. He hadn't slowed down, and when I glanced back again, he was still there, maintaining the same distance between us. That's when I started to feel the first flickers of fear. My car was maybe 50 feet away, parked near the far wall. The rows of cars around it were sparse, the level mostly empty this late. I told myself to stay calm, to focus on getting to my car and locking the doors. The man was probably harmless, just a coincidence, I thought. But as I walked toward my car, I noticed something strange. Every time I sped up, so did he. I slowed down slightly, pretending to adjust the strap of my bag, and his pace slowed too. He wasn't walking directly toward me, but he was following close enough to match my movements. My heart started to pound, the sound of it roaring in my ears. When I reached my car, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn my back on him to unlock the door, but standing there felt just as dangerous. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that he'd stopped about 20 feet away, his hood still up. He wasn't looking at me directly, but he was close enough that there was no mistaking his presence. I fumbled with my keys, trying to keep my hands steady as I pressed the unlock button. The car beeped softly, and I yanked the driver's door open. Just as I slid into the seat and locked the doors, I saw him start walking again, this time directly toward me. My breathing was ragged as I jammed the key into the ignition and started the engine. He was maybe 10 feet away now, and as the headlights illuminated him, I caught a better look at his face. He was older than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and a blank expression that sent chills down my spine. I threw the car into reverse, my tires squealing as I backed out of the space. He stopped walking and just stood there, watching as I turned the car around and sped toward the exit ramp. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep a grip on the wheel. When I reached the exit gate, I fumbled for my parking pass and swiped it as quickly as I could. The gate arm lifted, and I floored it out of the garage, not daring to look in my rearview mirror until I was several blocks away. It wasn't until I pulled into the lot of a well-lit gas station that I let myself breathe again. My chest felt tight, and my mind raced with 100 different scenarios of what could have happened if I hadn't gotten to my car in time. I sat there for a while, staring at the glowing lights of the convenience store, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't call the police. I didn't have a good description of the man, and technically, he hadn't done anything illegal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been waiting for me, that he'd chosen me for some reason I couldn't understand. For the next few weeks, I avoided parking in that garage. I started using the bus to get to campus, even though it added extra time to my commute. I told a few friends about what happened, and they tried to reassure me that it was probably nothing. Just some weirdo, they said. He probably wasn't even following you. But I knew better. The way he'd matched my pace, the way he stopped when I stopped, and the way he walked toward me at the end, it wasn't random. He'd been following me, and I was lucky to get away when I did. To this day, I can't walk through a parking garage without feeling that same tightness in my chest, that same instinct to look over my shoulder. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I trust my instincts now, and I'll never ignore that feeling again. It started on a Wednesday morning, one of those quiet days where nothing seems out of place. I was home alone, working in my makeshift office near the front of the house. The neighborhood was still, with most people off at work or school. The only sounds were the occasional car passing by and the faint hum of the heater kicking in. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Not a casual tap-tap, but 3 firm knocks. It startled me enough that I jumped, spilling some coffee onto my desk. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the doorbell hadn't rung. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch. He was middle-aged, clean-shaven, and dressed in a plain button-up shirt and slacks. He carried a clipboard and wore a badge clipped to his pocket. The badge looked official enough, though I couldn't make out what it said from where I stood. "Good morning," he said with a polite smile. "Sorry to bother you. I'm with the city's survey department. We're conducting property evaluations in the area, and I just need to confirm a few details about your home." His tone was professional, his demeanor calm. There was nothing inherently alarming about him, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was how he kept glancing past me, like he was trying to look inside the house. "Ah, sure," I said, hesitantly. "What do you need to know?" He looked down at his clipboard and flipped through a few papers. I just need to verify some basic information. Number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, things like that. It's for the city records. I hesitated. Wouldn't that information already be on file? His smile didn't falter, but there was a slight pause before he answered. Sometimes the records aren't updated accurately. It's just a quick confirmation. I didn't love the idea of giving out details about my house to a stranger, even one claiming to be from the city. Do you have any identification? I asked, keeping my hand on the door. Of course, he said, reaching for the badge on his pocket. He held it up, but not close enough for me to see it clearly. See? Official Surveyor. I can give you a contact number if you'd like to confirm. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. His badge looked generic, the kind you could order online. The name on it didn't match the department logo. My gut told me this wasn't right, and I decided to trust it. I'm sorry, I said firmly, but I'm not comfortable sharing information about my home. If you need anything, you can contact me through the proper channels. His smile faded, and his expression shifted ever so slightly. It wasn't anger, but something colder. All right, he said after a moment, his tone still polite but clipped. No problem. Have a good day. He turned and walked away, heading down the driveway toward the street. I watched him go, noting how he didn't stop at any of my neighbors' houses. He just got into a gray sedan parked a few houses down and drove off. I stood there for a moment, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. The encounter didn't sit right, but I convinced myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he was legit, and I'd just been overly cautious. Better safe than sorry, I told myself. That night, I locked the doors and windows as usual. I double-checked everything, even though I didn't always do that. It wasn't paranoia, I told myself, just being careful. The next morning, I found the back gate open. It wasn't broken or hanging off its hinges, just unlatched. I knew I had closed it the day before because I'd let the dog out after lunch. I always made a point to latch it afterward. I walked around the yard, looking for anything out of place. That's when I noticed faint footprints in the dirt near the side of the house. They were too big to be mine and too fresh to be old. I knelt down to get a better look, and my heart sank. They led straight to one of the windows. The window screen had been tampered with. It wasn't torn, but it had been partially pried away from the frame. Whoever did it didn't get inside. The window was still locked, but the attempt was clear. Someone had been here. My mind immediately went to the city surveyor from the day before. His questions, his clipboard, the way he looked past me into the house, it all clicked. He wasn't from the city. He had been scouting my home, testing whether I'd be an easy target. I called the police and filed a report. The officer who came to the house listened carefully as I described the man and what had happened. He nodded as I spoke, his expression grim. This isn't the first time we've heard about something like this, he said. There's been a few reports of people posing as utility workers or city officials to gain access to homes. He took down all the details I could remember, the man's appearance, his car, the fake badge, and assured me they'd investigate. But there wasn't much they could do without more information. Just be vigilant, he said before leaving. If you see him again, call us immediately. For the next few days, I felt like I was living in a bubble of paranoia. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept all the blinds closed and checked the locks multiple times a day. I even installed a camera above the front door, something I'd been meaning to do for months but had always put off. Then, a week later, I spotted the gray sedan parked down the street again. It was the same car, I was sure of it. It sat there for hours, the windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. I haven't seen the man since, but the experience has stayed with me. It's the kind of thing that makes you question everything, that makes you second guess every knock at the door. I still don't know what he was planning, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts that day. It might have saved me from something far worse. It started like any other night. My friends and I had gone to a party at a house just off campus. It was the usual thing: loud music, red cups, and people laughing a little too loudly. Nothing out of the ordinary. I'd been to 100 parties like this before. You show up, you talk to people, maybe you drink a little, then you go home. Simple. That's how I met him, Ethan. He was standing by the kitchen counter when I walked in, talking to a couple of people I didn't know. I wasn't really looking to meet anyone, but he smiled and waved me over. I figured, why not? Maybe I'd find someone to talk to, maybe even make a new friend. I was new to the area, and most of my time was spent either in class or studying, so getting out was a nice change. Ethan was charming. Not in the way that made you feel like he was trying too hard, but just enough to make you feel comfortable. He had a friendly smile, a laid-back vibe, and we had some mutual friends. We started talking, and the conversation just flowed. He wasn't pushy or intense, but there was something about him that kept pulling me in. He asked where I was from, what I was studying, and we chatted about campus life. At first, everything felt completely normal. He made me laugh, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. But as the night went on, I started noticing something. It wasn't anything huge, just little things that felt off. Every time I tried to walk away to talk to someone else, he'd follow me, like he didn't want to be separated. He would keep reappearing in the same places, even when I hadn't seen him for a while. After a few hours, I was ready to leave. I didn't know anyone very well at the party, and I wasn't in the mood to stay up late. I said goodbye to my friends and started heading for the door. But as I walked past the kitchen, there was Ethan again. He must have noticed I was leaving, because he immediately started walking toward me. "Hey, don't leave yet," he said, his voice a little too eager. I paused, feeling a little awkward. "I think I'm done for the night." "It's been fun, though." He smiled, but there was something in his eyes that made me hesitate. "I get it, but we should hang out sometime. Maybe grab a coffee? What's your number?" At that point, I was starting to feel uncomfortable. He seemed nice, but there was something about the way he kept asking that felt a little too intense. Still, I didn't want to be rude, so I gave him my number. It wasn't a big deal at first. He texted me the next day, saying he had a good time at the party and asking if I wanted to meet up for coffee sometime. I didn't think much of it. I responded, and we set a time. I went to the coffee shop, thinking it would just be a casual hangout. When I showed up, he was already there. We had a good time, at least, at first. He was easy to talk to, and I thought maybe I'd been reading too much into things. Maybe he was just a little clingy. We talked about our classes, campus events, and the usual small talk. But as the conversation went on, he started asking questions that felt a little too personal. "So, what are you doing later? Are you living in the dorms? Is it just you there?" I tried to brush it off, telling him I didn't have any big plans, just homework. But he kept pushing, asking about my roommates, about my schedule, and how often I was out. It started to feel invasive. I politely told him I had to go, and as I was leaving, he walked me to the door. "Hey, I'll walk you back to your dorm. It's not safe for a girl to be out here alone." I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't want to make him feel bad, but I also didn't want him to think I needed him to walk me back. So I told him I'd be fine and gave a half-hearted excuse about being in a rush. He smiled but didn't push it, which was a small relief. Over the next few weeks, things got weirder. Ethan started showing up outside my classes. I'd be walking to a lecture, and there he'd be, just standing there, waiting. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But when I saw him the third time, I started to feel uneasy. He'd wave, walk up, and ask if I was heading to lunch or if I had time to grab a coffee. It wasn't just in the classroom building. He'd pop up outside the library or near the student center. Once, I had just finished a study session, and when I walked out, I saw him standing by a bench, looking around like he was waiting for someone. I was about to turn the other way when he spotted me and waved me over. At first, I thought maybe he just enjoyed talking to me, but I started to get this strange feeling. It wasn't just his constant appearances, it was how he acted when he saw me. He'd act like we were the best of friends, but it felt forced. Like he was trying too hard to convince me we were close. One evening, I came back to my dorm after a long day of classes, and when I opened the door to my room, I froze. I could have sworn I saw someone's shadow move past the window. I stepped back quickly and looked around. My heart started pounding. I hadn't seen Ethan in a few days, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was him. I checked the peephole on the door, but it was empty. Still, I couldn't relax. I didn't want to assume the worst, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I didn't see him again for a few days after that, but when I did, he was waiting outside my dorm building. I couldn't help but feel like he was watching me. It didn't take long for my friends to notice either. I'd mentioned the weird occurrences, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. They assured me it was probably nothing, but the more time passed, the more convinced I was that something was off. I started avoiding the places I knew Ethan might show up. I changed the times I'd leave for class, took a longer route when I went to the library, and even started taking the bus instead of walking. But then, one day, when I was on my way back from the grocery store, I turned the corner to see Ethan standing across the street from my dorm. He was just standing there, staring. My heart dropped into my stomach. I quickly ducked behind a nearby car, hoping he hadn't seen me, but when I looked up again, he was gone. The next day, I didn't go to class. I called my mom and told her everything that had been happening. She was concerned, of course. She urged me to report him, but I was hesitant. What if I was overreacting? What if he was just being friendly? That evening, I got a text from Ethan, the first in a few days. It was short, but it made my skin crawl. I see you're avoiding me. I'll be outside your dorm at 8. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked his number and made a plan to speak with campus security the next day. I never saw him again, at least not in the same way. I've always considered myself a fairly aware person, someone who trusts their instincts when something feels off. But that doesn't mean I'm always right. And it certainly didn't help me the day I encountered the man at my front door. It started as an ordinary Thursday. I was working from home that day, sitting at my desk with my headphones in, trying to power through a stack of emails. The neighborhood was quiet, as it usually is in the middle of the day. There weren't many cars driving by, and most people were at work. I didn't expect any interruptions, but of course, life rarely goes as planned. I was just about to open my email inbox when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated. I checked the time. It was just past noon, and no one usually stopped by unannounced. Still, I figured it was maybe a delivery, or perhaps someone from the neighborhood with a question. I got up and peeked through the peephole. There was a man standing on my porch, holding a clipboard. He was dressed in dark blue work clothes that looked official, with a utility company's logo on the sleeve. At least, that's what I thought I saw from the peephole. I opened the door slightly, keeping the chain lock on. "Hello?" I asked, not fully opening it. "Good afternoon," the man said in a calm, neutral voice. "I'm from the gas company. We're conducting some routine safety checks in the area, and there's been a report of a gas leak nearby. Just want to make sure everything's good on your end. Mind if I come in for a few minutes to check your system?" His demeanor seemed normal enough, nothing overtly suspicious. In fact, he even looked polite, like someone doing his job. I briefly wondered if maybe it was just some routine maintenance or if they were trying to get everyone's systems up to code. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me, or how quickly he rattled off his explanation. But my gut told me to be cautious. However, I told myself I was overthinking it. I had utility workers in my house before, and they all had done their jobs without issue. So, against my better judgment, I nodded. "Sure, okay," I said, opening the door wider. "Just give me a second." I went to take the chain lock off, but before I could, he pushed the door open slightly more, just enough to slip inside. He didn't rush in, but he didn't wait for an invitation either. "Thanks," he said, as though he'd been invited in already. His voice had shifted slightly, and it made me tense up. I couldn't explain it. Something wasn't right. I'll just need a minute," I said, trying to keep my composure. "I just need to grab my phone, and I'll be right with you." I was hoping to buy some time. Maybe I could call the utility company to double check, but as I turned to walk into the living room, I heard the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. My heart skipped. It wasn't the usual sound of the door closing, it was unmistakably the sound of the door locking. I spun around quickly, already feeling a cold rush of panic. The man was standing there, looking calm, almost too calm. "Is everything all right? You seem a little tense." My blood turned cold. "What do you mean, the door is locked?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a precaution," he said with a half smile, though there was no real warmth behind it. "You wouldn't want any issues with your gas, would you?" He took a step further into the house without waiting for an answer. I wasn't sure what to do, but my instinct screamed at me to get out, to get away from him, to run. I knew the door was locked behind me, and I had no idea if he had locked it himself or if he had some key. "Can you please unlock the door?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He ignored me, continuing to step further inside like he was familiar with the house. "Just want to check a few things." He moved past me, into the kitchen. I could feel the air in the room shift, the tension building in my chest. I told myself I was overreacting, but my gut was telling me something else entirely. He opened the kitchen cabinets and began to inspect them, as if it was part of his job. It was too odd. The gas lines were outside, right? Why would he need to look around the house? I stared at him, trying to come up with a plan. Was this guy really a worker, or was something far worse happening? I needed to do something, anything, to get control of the situation. But what? I didn't want to confront him directly, not when I had no idea what he could do. I could tell he wasn't acting normal anymore. His actions were deliberate and methodical. He wasn't here to check the gas. He was here for something else. I took a step toward the door, my hand brushing against the wall as I prepared to make a break for it. But before I could move, he turned to face me. "I should probably check upstairs," he said, with that same unsettling calm. "You wouldn't want any surprises, right?" I froze. My pulse quickened. My mind was racing. I had to stop him from going upstairs. He couldn't get to the second floor, where my bedroom was, where I kept my phone. "No," I said, a little too firmly. "No, there's no need to go upstairs. I have a gas detector in the basement. It's just down there. It's fine." He looked at me for a second, then smiled again, but this time it wasn't friendly at all. "If you say so," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I'll just have a quick look upstairs. You know, for safety." I was done. This wasn't happening. I made a quick decision. Without saying another word, I turned and bolted for the front door. I had to get out. I had to get away from this man. As I reached the door, I fumbled with the lock, trying to turn it. I heard him behind me, his footsteps quickening, but I didn't dare turn around. The door finally opened, and I stumbled out onto the porch, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, pounding on their door with everything I had. They let me in, and I quickly explained what had happened. My neighbor, thankfully, called the police immediately. The man never came back, and the police couldn't find any sign of him when they checked the area, but they assured me that he wasn't a utility worker. He didn't have any identification. I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I learned my lesson that day. You don't just trust anyone who knocks at your door, no matter what they claim. And you definitely don't let them inside. I've taken extra precautions since then. Deadbolts, security cameras, and a new routine. I can't risk that feeling again. I just wish I knew what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. It happened on a stretch of highway I've driven more times than I can count. It's one of those roads that feels endless, surrounded by flat fields, no landmarks, nothing to break the monotony. The kind of road where the sky feels too big, and you start counting the minutes until you're off it. It was late, maybe 10 or 11 at night. I was driving back from visiting a friend a couple of towns over. I had the radio low and the windows cracked open to keep myself awake. There weren't many cars out, just me, the occasional truck, and a dark sky that felt heavier than usual. At first, I didn't notice the car behind me. It was just headlights in the distance, blending in like they always do. But after a while, I realized they weren't getting any closer or farther away. They stayed there, hanging back at the same distance no matter how much I sped up or slowed down. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just keeping a steady pace, like I was. But the more I watched them in the rearview mirror, the more I felt like something was off. Every time I switched lanes, they did the same, like they were copying me. I decided to test it. I slowed down, almost to a crawl for the highway, to see if they would pass me. They didn't. Instead, they slowed down too, keeping the same distance. My heart started to pick up then. I wasn't scared yet, but I was definitely on edge. I tried to shake them off by speeding up again, going a little faster than I was comfortable with. For a second, I thought it worked. Their headlights faded back a little, and I thought they finally decided to stop tailing me. But then, they sped up too, closing the gap. That was when I knew something was wrong. This wasn't normal. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were just heading the same direction, and I was overthinking it. but deep down, I didn't believe that. I glanced at the GPS and saw there was an exit coming up in a couple of miles. It wasn't the one I needed, but I decided to take it anyway. If they followed me, I'd know for sure. The exit was one of those lonely off-ramps that dumps you onto a smaller road surrounded by nothing but darkness. As I took the turn, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping to see them continue down the highway. They didn't. The car followed me, turning onto the same road. That was when the fear really hit me. My hands felt slick on the steering wheel, and my chest was tight. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. The smaller road was even emptier than the highway. No streetlights, no cars, just a faint glow of my headlights and theirs. I thought about pulling over to let them pass, but something about the way they were driving made me think that wasn't a good idea. I kept going, trying to stay calm and think straight. The car behind me started getting closer, their headlights brighter in my mirror. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, my whole body bracing for something. Then, out of nowhere, they sped up and swerved into the next lane, coming up beside me. I glanced over and saw a man in the driver's seat. I couldn't make out much, just a shadowy figure with one hand on the wheel, staring straight ahead. He didn't look at me, but the way his car drifted closer to mine felt deliberate. He was trying to push me off the road. Panic set in. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to keep my car steady as he kept edging closer. I honked my horn, hoping it would scare him off or at least make him back off. It didn't. He stayed right there, his car inches from mine, forcing me toward the shoulder. I tried to speed up, but he matched my pace. I couldn't go any faster without losing control. My car started to drift toward the gravel at the side of the road, and I felt the tires start to slip. I swerved back into the lane, barely missing him, and he fell back for a moment. I thought maybe he'd given up, but then he was right there again, this time coming up behind me. His headlights filled my mirrors, blinding me, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. There were no other cars around, no gas stations or stores, nothing but darkness and an endless road. I kept driving, hoping to see some kind of sign or turnoff where I could get away. Then I saw it, a narrow side road coming up on the left. It wasn't marked, just a gap in the trees that looked like it might go somewhere. I didn't have a plan, but I took it. I yanked the wheel and turned hard, the tires screeching as I veered off the main road. The side road was rough, gravel kicking up under my tires, but I kept going. I glanced in the mirror and saw the other car hesitate for a second before following me. My heart sank. He wasn't giving up. The road twisted and turned, narrowing as it went. I couldn't go as fast as I wanted without risking a crash. The other car stayed close, his headlights bouncing in my mirror, but he wasn't trying to push me anymore. I wondered if he was waiting for me to make a mistake, to slow down or stop. Then I saw it, a small clearing up ahead with a cluster of houses. Relief flooded me. I didn't care whose house it was, I just needed to get to where someone could see me. I gunned the engine and pulled into the driveway of the first house I saw, slamming the brakes and throwing the car into park. The other car stopped at the edge of the clearing, just sitting there with its headlights on. I jumped out of my car and ran to the front door of the house, banging on it and yelling for help. It felt like an eternity before someone answered. An older man opened the door, looking confused and alarmed. I barely managed to get the words out, telling him someone was following me, trying to run me off the road. He stepped outside and looked toward the driveway, but the car was gone. I stood there, shaking and trying to catch my breath, while he called the police. They came and took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. I didn't get a good look at the driver, and there were no cameras on the road where it happened. I don't drive that stretch of highway at night anymore. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I can't stop thinking about how deliberate it all felt. He wasn't just messing around. He was trying to scare me, or worse. It was just another late night at the office. I had so much work to finish and thought it would be easier to just stay in the empty building instead of trying to get it all done the next day. The quiet was kind of nice, actually. I could focus without the usual distractions. Everyone else had already gone home, so I thought I'd have the place to myself for a few hours. I don't usually stay late, but the pressure from my boss had been intense, and this project had a tight deadline. I was an intern, so I had to prove myself. The dim lighting of the office made it easier to concentrate, the soft hum of the computers and the occasional sound of paper shuffling keeping me company. At least, that's what I thought. Around midnight, I noticed something odd. The security lights in the hallway flickered. They never did that before. I thought it was just the wiring or some minor issue with the lights. I went back to my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a heaviness in the air, like a presence that wasn't supposed to be there. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that someone was watching me, but every time I turned around, I was alone. Then, I heard it. A faint noise. A rustling. I froze, straining to listen. It was coming from the hallway. My heart raced, and I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the cleaning crew was still around. But no, it was much too late for that. I stood up and walked cautiously toward the door, trying to peek into the hallway. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, there was no sign of anyone. I figured it was just a power surge, nothing to worry about. But then I heard footsteps. Soft, slow steps. They echoed down the hallway, just faint enough that I wasn't sure if I was hearing things. I quickly looked over at the hallway exit, hoping someone would walk past. But nobody did. The footsteps kept coming closer, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of someone's breathing. My stomach dropped. This was wrong. I slowly backed away from the door, trying not to make any noise. I grabbed my phone, ready to call security if I had to, but before I could press the number, the door creaked open. I didn't know who it was at first. They stepped into the light just enough for me to see the outline of a person, but their face was hidden in shadow. I froze, hoping they would just go away, but they didn't. "Hey," a voice called out, rough and tired. "It's me." I didn't recognize the voice, but something about it was familiar. It took me a moment before the person stepped closer, and I could see their face. It was Matt. Matt was one of the senior employees in the marketing department, but he'd been fired weeks ago. He had left the company under strange circumstances, and I'd heard rumors about it. He'd been a bit odd, but nobody ever really talked about what had happened. He just stopped showing up one day. Matt was standing in front of me now, wearing an old company t-shirt, his hair disheveled. His eyes were wide, as if he hadn't slept in days. I could see that he was sweaty, his clothes wrinkled. But there was something off about him, something wasn't right. I backed away, unsure of what to say. "Matt, what are you doing here?" My voice was shaky. He didn't respond at first. Instead, he just stared at me, his eyes darting around the office. "I've been here for a while. Been working, you know," he said, his voice flat. I just didn't want to leave. I felt my chest tighten. "Matt, you can't be here. You don't work here anymore. The building is closed. You need to go." He didn't seem to hear me. He just stood there, staring at me like I wasn't even speaking. Then, he started walking toward me, slow, deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't need to leave," he said, his voice taking on a more menacing edge. "I like it here. I like the quiet. I don't want anyone to find out, but they'll understand. They'll all understand." My blood ran cold. Something was terribly wrong. I had to leave. I turned toward the exit, but before I could make it, he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "You shouldn't go anywhere," he said, his voice low. "It's safer here. I don't want to be alone anymore." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I was terrified. This wasn't Matt anymore. Whoever this was, it wasn't the same person I had known. His demeanor had shifted, and I could feel it. The air around me seemed heavier now. "Matt, please," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "You need help. I'm calling security. I'm calling someone." I reached for my phone again, but before I could dial, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. I yelped and tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I don't want anyone else here. I don't want to go back." The look in his eyes was something I couldn't explain, wild, desperate. There was no rationality there, just a kind of crazed desperation. My mind raced, and I thought of every possible way to get away, but I knew I had to act fast. I had to get out of there, and I had to get away from him. I twisted my arm free, shoving him back as hard as I could. He stumbled, but he didn't fall. I ran for the nearest exit, my feet pounding against the floor. I didn't stop until I was outside the building, gasping for breath. I didn't look back. I just ran. I stayed in the parking lot, trembling, until the security guard came to check on me. I don't know what Matt's intentions were, but I never went back to that office building after that night. I found a new internship elsewhere, and I didn't even tell anyone about what happened. I couldn't. Every time I drive past that building, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. What if I hadn't left when I did? What was he really planning? All I know is that I'm glad I'm not there anymore. And I pray I never have to face Matt again. It started on a Friday night. I just finished dinner at a small cafe downtown and was walking back to my car when someone brushed past me hard enough to knock my purse from my shoulder. I didn't think much of it at first, just someone in a hurry. But when I bent down to grab it, it wasn't there. The person who'd bumped me was already disappearing around the corner, and I realized they had it. My heart sank. My whole life was in that bag: wallet, keys, phone. I ran after them, but by the time I turned the corner, they were gone. I flagged down a nearby police officer and explained what had happened. He said they'd file a report but didn't sound optimistic about getting it back. I drove home feeling shaken. I canceled my credit cards, locked my phone remotely, and changed some passwords from my laptop. I thought that was the end of it. Annoying, yes, but manageable. I didn't even bother to tell my family. It wasn't worth the stress. The next morning, my mom called. Her voice was tight, like she'd been crying. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, and she sounded surprised. She said she'd gotten a text from me the night before saying I was in trouble and needed money. My stomach turned over. I hadn't sent anything like that. I checked my accounts immediately. Someone had managed to get into my email. There were drafts of messages I hadn't written and emails forwarded to addresses I didn't recognize. They'd sent messages to my friends and family asking for help, claiming I'd been in an accident and needed cash urgently. Some of them had even responded. I called the bank and froze everything, but it wasn't fast enough. A few transactions had already gone through online shopping, money transfers. I spent hours on the phone trying to clean up the mess. By the time I finished, it was late afternoon, and I was exhausted. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I got a text from my sister. It was strange because she rarely messaged me so late. She asked if I was okay and said she was outside. Confused, I went to the window and looked out. Her car wasn't there. I texted her back, saying I was fine and asked what she meant. She replied, "You just told me to come over. Said you needed me." I hadn't sent that. I checked my messages and found one I didn't remember typing, sent from my number to hers. My heart pounded as I stared at it. The wording didn't even sound like me. I stayed up the rest of the night, checking my locks over and over, convinced someone was watching me. I thought about calling the police, but what could they do? No one had broken in, and the texts didn't prove anything. The next morning, I went to the phone store to get my number changed. They told me my account had been accessed from another device, likely by someone who'd gotten into my carrier account using personal information from my wallet. They secured it, and I left with a new number. I hoped that would solve the problem. It didn't. By Monday, emails were coming in from places I hadn't been, confirmation of hotel reservations, online purchases, even a gym membership. Someone was pretending to be me. Worse, they were good at it. They'd use my social media to post updates, things like feeling sick, taking a break from the world, so anyone who noticed the weird messages wouldn't question them. I went to the police again, and this time, they took it more seriously. They opened an investigation and advised me to monitor my accounts closely. They said it could be a case of identity theft, but something about it felt too personal for that. Whoever was doing this didn't just want my money, they wanted to take over my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. It said, "You can't stop me." I froze. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to block the number, but I didn't. Instead, I replied, "Who's this?" The response came instantly, "You." I didn't sleep at all after that. I called the police in the morning and showed them the texts. They said they'd trace the number and see what they could find. They told me to keep my doors locked and not to go anywhere alone. That evening, I noticed my front door lock looked different. Scratched, like someone had tried to force it. I checked all the windows, and one of them was slightly open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I stayed at a friend's house that night. The next day, I got another text. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my house. My hands were in the sink, washing dishes. I hadn't even known anyone was there. The message said, "I'm always watching." That was the last straw. I went back to the police, and this time, they sent someone to my house. They found a camera hidden in my living room, a small, black device tucked between books on a shelf. I felt sick. I hadn't noticed it, hadn't even thought to look. The officers told me to pack a bag and stay somewhere else while they investigated. I left that afternoon and went to my parents' house. For the first time, I told them everything. The police eventually traced the text to a prepaid phone purchased at a gas station across town. The camera had no fingerprints, and the email trail led nowhere. Whoever it was, they'd been careful. Too careful. I haven't been back to my house since. I'm staying with my parents for now, trying to put my life back together. The texts have stopped, but I still feel like someone's watching me. I don't know if they'll ever find the person who did this, and I'm not sure I want to know who it was. It started out as a dumb idea. My friends dared me to hide out in the department store after closing. They said I wouldn't last an hour alone after the lights went off. We'd been hanging out at the mall all afternoon, and by the time we came up with the plan, it was almost closing time. They left before the staff started their final rounds, leaving me alone to figure out how to stay unnoticed. I found a spot behind a rack of winter coats in the men's section. It wasn't perfect, but it was quiet, and the coats hung low enough to block me from sight. I crouched there, waiting, listening as the last announcements played overhead and the store got quieter. Eventually, I heard the sound of the security gates rolling down at the entrances. When everything was silent, I crawled out. The store looked strange in the dark, all shadows and empty aisles. It wasn't scary, not yet. Mostly, it felt like I'd stepped into another world. I walked through the aisles, trying not to make too much noise. My plan was to stay for a couple of hours, take a few pictures to prove I'd done it, and then sneak out when the gates reopened in the morning. I headed to the electronics section first. The TV displays were off, but a few laptops were still on, their screens casting faint blue light. I took out my phone to record a video, whispering into the mic about how I was all alone. That's when I heard the first noise, a sharp, metallic clink, like a door handle being turned. I froze, holding my breath, and looked around. Nothing moved. The sound didn't come again, so I told myself it was just part of the store settling. I kept walking, heading toward the toy section. That's when I saw the flashlight. It was faint at first, a beam of light sweeping across the floor on the far side of the store. My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought about security. I figured they'd just lock the doors and leave, maybe check the cameras once in a while. But someone was definitely inside, moving through the aisles. I ducked behind a shelf and tried to think. If they caught me, I'd be in trouble. Maybe not arrested, but definitely banned from the mall, and my parents would kill me. I decided to wait until the light passed and then find a better hiding spot until the person left. But the light didn't pass. It got closer. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, like whoever it was wasn't in any hurry. I crouched lower, pressing myself against the back of the shelf. The footsteps stopped, and I held my breath, listening. Then I heard a voice. "I know you're in here." It wasn't loud, but it carried through the silence of the store. The tone was flat, almost casual, but there was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. "I saw you on the cameras," the voice continued. "Come out now, and this will be easy." I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he'd hear it. I peeked through a gap in the shelves and saw the flashlight beam swinging back and forth. The man holding it was wearing a uniform, but it didn't look like the mall security I'd seen before. His shirt was too loose, untucked, and there was no badge. Just a dark shape stitched over the pocket. He walked past my aisle, the light sweeping dangerously close to where I was hiding. I stayed frozen, trying to keep my breathing as quiet as possible. After a few seconds, he moved on, but I didn't feel safe. Something about him wasn't right. When I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore, I crept out and headed toward the back of the store, where the employee-only area was. My new plan was to hide in the stockroom until morning. The store's cameras couldn't see back there, and I figured the man wouldn't bother checking. The stockroom was cold and smelled like cardboard. Rows of shelves stretched out in every direction, filled with boxes and loose items. I found a spot behind a stack of pallets and sat down, trying to calm myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. There was a message from one of my friends. "Did you chicken out yet?" I started typing a reply when I heard the sound of a door opening nearby. The stockroom door. I shoved my phone into my pocket and scrambled deeper into the pallets, crouching low. The man's footsteps were heavier now, echoing in the quiet space. His flashlight beam cut through the gaps between the shelves, searching. He didn't say anything this time, just walked slowly, methodically. I realized then that he wasn't looking for a thief or someone breaking the rules. He was hunting. I held my breath as the light passed over the pallets where I was hiding. It lingered for a second, then moved on. The footsteps grew fainter, and I thought he might be leaving, but then they stopped. "Do you think I won't find you?" he said. His voice was closer than I expected. "This is my place. My rules." I felt a wave of panic. I couldn't stay there. If he found me, I didn't think he'd just kick me out. There was something wrong with him, something dangerous. I waited until his light moved away, then crawled out from my hiding spot and headed toward the exit. I made it back to the sales floor without being seen. The store was even darker now, and I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. I moved as quickly as I could, trying to stay quiet. The front doors were just ahead, and I could see the faint glow of the mall's lights beyond the gates. I thought I was going to make it. Then I heard the sound of keys jingling behind me. I turned and saw the man standing at the edge of the aisle. He wasn't shining his flashlight anymore, but I could see him clearly enough. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. He smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. "Leaving already?" he asked. I didn't answer. I turned and ran toward the front doors, my sneakers squeaking on the tile. I heard him running behind me, his footsteps faster now, closing the distance. When I reached the gate, I grabbed the bars and shook them, but they didn't budge. The locks were solid, and there was no way I could squeeze through. I looked around, desperate for another way out, and saw the fire exit sign glowing in the distance. I sprinted for it, my legs burning, my lungs aching. The man was still behind me, but I didn't look back. When I reached the fire exit, I slammed into the bar and pushed it open. The alarm blared, deafening, but I didn't care. I ran outside into the cold night air, my chest heaving. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across the parking lot. When I finally turned around, the man was standing in the doorway, just watching me. He didn't chase me. He just stood there, the alarm blaring behind him, until I was out of sight. I never told anyone what happened. Not my friends, not my parents. I don't even know if they would have believed me. I've thought about telling this story for a while now, but every time I try, I can't quite get the words right. I'm not a writer, and I don't think I ever will be. But I feel like I have to get it out. Someone should know what happened. What I saw. What I felt. I went camping with a few friends last summer. It was supposed to be a simple trip, nothing fancy. A weekend to unwind in the mountains, escape the noise of the city. We set up camp near a river, not too far from a well-known trail, but far enough that we wouldn't have to deal with other hikers. Everything seemed perfect at first. The weather was nice, the air was fresh, and the only sounds were the river and the birds. We had a good time. A few hikes, some fishing, a campfire. It was nice. But on the third day, things started to go wrong. We had planned to go for a long hike. The others wanted to explore a bit further, up into the hills. I didn't want to go at first, but I decided to tag along. I figured it would be nice to get away from the camp for a bit and stretch my legs. So we packed some water, snacks, and set off early in the morning. The hike was more difficult than I expected. The path wasn't as clear as I thought it would be, and the terrain got rough pretty quickly. But the view was beautiful. We stopped at a few overlooks, took some pictures, and then started heading back down. I didn't think it would be that hard to find our way back to camp. But by the time we turned around to head back, I realized I had gotten turned around. I wasn't sure which direction we had come from. I thought I remembered the trail, but everything started to look the same. I didn't want to admit I was lost, so I kept walking, thinking I'd find the way back soon enough. The others were ahead of me, but I wasn't too worried. I thought I'd catch up. The deeper into the woods I went, the more everything seemed unfamiliar. The path was less visible now, overgrown in spots, and I couldn't hear the river anymore. I stopped and tried to get my bearings, but I couldn't make out anything that looked familiar. I should have turned back right then, but I didn't. I kept going. After what felt like hours, I noticed something strange. There was a small clearing ahead. The ground was trampled, the grass bent, and there were footprints. They didn't look like animal prints. They were too large, too uneven. As I got closer, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A pile of broken branches, stacked in a way that didn't seem natural. It looked like someone had been trying to build something, but there was no sign of anyone around. I felt a knot form in my stomach, and I tried to turn around, but that's when I heard it. A rustling sound, like someone was moving through the trees. It was faint, but it was there. My heart started to race, and I held my breath, straining to listen. There was no one else on the trail. I knew that. I hadn't seen anyone else the whole time we'd been out here. And yet, I could feel something watching me. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, but it felt like the woods were closing in on me. The rustling grew louder, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Complete silence. I didn't wait around to figure out what it was. I turned and started running, hoping to find the trail again. The panic started to settle in. I was lost, and I didn't know which way to go. I kept running, but it felt like the trees were getting thicker, like they were deliberately blocking my path. I could feel my chest tightening, and my legs were starting to give out. I had to stop for a minute, catch my breath. That's when I noticed something else. There were markings on the trees. At first, I thought they were just scratches, maybe from animals, but the more I looked, the more I realized they weren't. They were deliberate. A series of notches, almost like someone was marking their territory. But it didn't make sense. There shouldn't have been anyone out here. Not this deep in the woods. Not this far from the trail. I was about to turn around when I heard a voice. It was quiet at first, barely a whisper, like someone calling my name. But it wasn't anyone I recognized. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice didn't sound friendly. It sounded urgent, like it didn't want me to leave. I started to back away, but the ground under me shifted, and I lost my balance. I fell, landing hard on the ground. When I looked up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure. A man. He was standing between the trees, watching me. He was tall, but he wasn't moving. I couldn't make out his face clearly. It was covered in shadow, but I could tell he was staring at me. It was like he had been waiting for me. I couldn't breathe. My whole body went rigid, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared into the trees. Vanished. Like he wasn't even there. I stayed frozen on the ground for a long time, trying to process what just happened. Was he real? Or was it my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't know. But I didn't care. I wasn't staying to find out. I got up as fast as I could and started running again. I didn't stop until I found the trail. By the time I made it back to camp, I was exhausted, covered in sweat, and my mind was racing. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not right away. I couldn't bring myself to say it. It was too insane, too unreal. But that night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I didn't sleep much. Every noise in the woods felt like a threat, and I kept expecting to see that man again. I didn't say anything to the others. They were just glad to see me back. We left the next day. I didn't tell them about the figure I saw or the strange markings on the trees. I couldn't. I didn't want to make it worse. But I still think about it. The man in the woods. The feeling of being watched. The strange markings. I don't know who or what was out there, but I know I never want to find out again. I went out camping by myself for the first time in a long time. I usually went with a group, but I had been feeling kind of drained from everything and thought some quiet time would help. It was a spot I'd been to before, not far from a trailhead. It wasn't an official campground, but it was a clear area near a creek tucked into the woods. I set up my tent, had a quick meal, and just sat by the fire for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest. The weather was good, cool, no rain, and the stars were out. I turned in early, around 9 or so. I was tired from hiking in and setting up camp, and honestly, I was looking forward to a good night's sleep. I had packed light, just a small tent, a sleeping bag, and a few supplies. I kept my food in a bag tied up in a tree, about 20 feet from the campsite, like I'd always been told to do. You don't want animals getting into it. I woke up later, and at first, I wasn't sure why. My eyes opened in the dark, and I just lay there, trying to figure out what had woken me up. Then I heard a low, crunching sound, like something heavy stepping on twigs and leaves. It was close. My tent was small, with only a thin layer of fabric between me and whatever was out there, and I could hear every little sound. The crunching stopped for a moment, and I held my breath. Then I heard another noise, a deep, wet snuffling sound. It was loud, and it sent a cold shock through me. I knew right away what it was. A bear. There was no mistaking it. My heart started pounding. I lay as still as I could, staring up at the roof of the tent, listening. The bear moved closer, and I heard the sound of my food bag being torn at. The rope I'd used to hang it up must not have been high enough. I felt stupid for not checking it better, but now it didn't matter. All I could think was that it was right there, and if it wanted to, it could easily come toward the tent next. The sound of the bear tearing into the bag went on for what felt like forever. It huffed and grunted, and every so often, there was a loud crunch as it bit into something. I was too scared to move, even though I knew I should try to make noise or do something to scare it off. But what if that just made it mad? I didn't have anything to protect myself, no gun or bear spray, just a small camping knife that was still in my backpack. Even if I had it in my hand, I knew it wouldn't do much. I thought about trying to reach for my phone to check the time, but it was in the corner of the tent, and I didn't dare move. I didn't even want to unzip the sleeping bag, I just stayed frozen, listening. My whole body felt tense, like my muscles were locked up, and every little sound the bear made seemed to echo inside my head. At one point, I heard it moving again. The heavy steps came closer, slow and deliberate. I could feel the vibrations in the ground, just faint but there. It was coming toward the tent. My chest felt tight, and I thought I might stop breathing altogether. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if that would somehow help. The bear sniffed loudly, right next to the tent. I could hear it so clearly that I felt like I could picture it in my head, its nose brushing against the fabric, the sound of its breath, low and rumbling. My mind kept racing, imagining what would happen if it decided to push through. I could feel tears starting to well up, but I didn't move. I just kept telling myself to stay still, to stay quiet, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The bear circled the tent, slow and steady. I could hear its claws scraping the ground as it moved, and every step felt like it lasted an eternity. At one point, it stopped, and I thought maybe it had gone back to the food. But then I heard it again, closer this time, its breath heavy and loud. I couldn't tell how long it stayed near the tent. Time felt stretched out and strange, like hours were passing even though it might have only been minutes. Finally, the bear let out a low grunt and moved away. I could hear it walking back toward where the food bag had been, the steps growing fainter. I didn't move. I stayed curled up in the sleeping bag, my fists clenched so tight that my hands were sore. I was too scared to do anything, too scared to even think clearly. The noises from the bear went on for a while longer, but they were farther away now. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there, every little creak or rustle making my heart race all over again. When the first light started to come through the tent, I finally dared to unzip it and look outside. The food bag was gone, completely torn off the rope and dragged away somewhere. There were deep claw marks in the dirt and mud near the tree, and even some on the tree trunk itself. I packed up as fast as I could. My hands were shaking the whole time, and I kept looking around, expecting to see the bear coming back. By the time I was on the trail heading back to my car, the sun was fully up, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every little noise in the woods made me jump. When I finally got back to my car and locked the doors, I felt like I could breathe again. I sat there for a long time before I started the engine, just trying to calm down. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach twist. It's not like I was attacked or anything, but being that close to something so powerful and knowing there's nothing you can do, it stays with you. It makes you feel small. It was supposed to be a simple overnight hike. I'd been planning it for weeks, carefully picking a trail I knew wasn't too crowded but still had enough markers that I wouldn't get lost. I packed everything I needed: food, gear, and my water reservoir, which I triple-checked before leaving. The hike out to the campsite was perfect. The weather was clear, the air crisp. I didn't see another person the whole way, and for once, I didn't mind. It was peaceful, just me and the sounds of the forest. I reached the spot I'd picked out a little before sunset, a flat clearing near a small stream. I set up my tent, cooked a quick meal, and sat outside watching the stars come out. When the temperature dropped, I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I felt ready to tackle the hike back. I packed up camp quickly, not wanting to waste daylight. I took a sip from my water reservoir before zipping it into my pack, and everything seemed fine. The stream nearby was clear, so I refilled my backup bottle just in case and started on the trail. It wasn't until late morning that I noticed something was wrong. I stopped to take a drink and realized the water tasted off. At first, I thought maybe it was the plastic from the reservoir, but I'd never had that problem before. I took another sip, and this time, the taste was stronger, almost metallic. I stopped walking and took the reservoir out of my pack to inspect it. The water looked fine, but the smell hit me as soon as I opened it. It was chemical, sharp, like something you'd use to clean a bathroom. I dumped it out immediately, my heart pounding. I didn't understand. I'd filled the reservoir that morning from the same stream I'd used the night before, and I'd used a filter both times. I checked my backup bottle, and that's when the panic really set in. The water in the bottle had the same smell. I didn't know what to do. I was miles from the trailhead, and the sun was getting higher. It was hot, and I'd already been hiking for a couple of hours. I'd planned my water carefully, and now I didn't have any that was safe to drink. I thought about turning back to the stream near the campsite, but the idea made me nervous. What if there was something in the water there? Or worse, what if someone was there? The thought came out of nowhere, but once I had it, I couldn't shake it. I tried to push it away. Who would do something like this? But the reservoir and bottle were fine the night before. I was sure of it. I decided to keep going. The trail was supposed to follow another stream a few miles ahead, and I figured I'd try again there. The hike felt different now. Every sound in the forest made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me, but the trail stayed empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the time I reached the second stream, I was sweating and lightheaded. I crouched by the water, my filter in hand, but I hesitated. The water looked fine, but what if it wasn't? What if the problem wasn't the water at all? I forced myself to filter some and took a small sip. It tasted normal, but I couldn't bring myself to drink more. The memory of the smell from my reservoir was still too strong. I filled my backup bottle and packed it away, deciding I'd only drink if I absolutely had to. I kept walking, trying to focus on the trail ahead and not the growing sense of dread in my chest. The trail started to climb, winding up a steep hill. I was struggling by then, my legs shaking from dehydration. I had to stop every few minutes to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. At the top of the hill, where the trail curved, there was a pile of rocks stacked in a way that wasn't natural. It was small, maybe a foot tall, but it stood out. I froze, staring at it. I didn't remember seeing it on the way in. Slowly, I walked closer. My mouth was dry, and not just from the lack of water. When I reached the rocks, I saw something sticking out from between them. A piece of paper, folded and tucked into the pile. I hesitated, my heart pounding, before pulling it out. The paper was damp and smudged, but I could still read the writing. Not safe. That was all it said. I dropped the paper and stumbled back, looking around wildly. The forest was silent, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I felt exposed, like whoever had left the note was watching me. My mind raced. Did they mean the water wasn't safe? Or was it something else? I didn't wait to find out. I started moving, faster now, even though my legs felt like they were going to give out. I don't know how long I walked like that, my head spinning and my throat burning. At some point, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was barely holding it together. My car was the only one in the parking lot, just as it had been when I'd arrived. I climbed in and locked the doors, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about the note or the water. I still don't know what happened out there, or who tampered with my supplies. All I know is that I've never felt safe in the woods since. I don't know what made me go out there that night. I wish I hadn't, but I did. I can still feel the weight of it when I think back. The rain was coming down hard, pounding against the windows like it had something to prove. The wind howled, and I could hear the trees outside creaking and bending with the storm. I was alone at the time, just trying to relax after a long day, curled up on the couch with a book. The only light came from the dim glow of the lamp beside me, and it was quiet, save for the sound of the rain. Then, I heard it. A noise. At first, I thought it was just the storm, maybe the wind making something rattle, but then I heard it again. It was faint, almost muffled, but there was no mistaking it. The sound of something scraping against the shed in my backyard. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I wondered if I was imagining things. It was late, and I hadn't heard anything earlier. The shed had always been just a place to store old garden tools and things I never used, but in that moment, it seemed so much more ominous. I tried to tell myself it was just a storm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The noise came again, a scraping sound, followed by something heavier, like a footstep. It was clear now, someone or something was out there. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police, but I didn't. I don't know why, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the thought that if I made that call, I'd seem foolish. Who would be outside in this weather? Who would be in my shed? But then the idea settled in my mind. What if someone was breaking in? What if they needed help? The thought of someone being hurt, someone in distress, kept me from just running back into the house. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, wrapped myself in my raincoat, and headed outside. I stepped out into the yard, my boots sinking into the soggy ground. The rain felt cold against my skin, but it didn't matter. My heart was racing in my chest. I turned on the flashlight and shined it toward the shed, my hands shaking. The beam flickered at first, but then it steadied, cutting through the darkness. The shed stood at the far end of the yard, shrouded in shadow. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I knew someone or something was out there. I took a few steps forward, the wet grass slick underfoot. I was just about to reach the door of the shed when I heard the noise again. This time, it was a thud. It made me jump, and my grip on the flashlight tightened. The door to the shed was slightly ajar, not enough for someone to get out, but enough for me to see a sliver of movement inside. I hesitated. I almost turned back, but I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. I pulled the door open, and the hinges squeaked loudly in the still night air. The shed smelled of old wood, damp and musty, and I had to squint in the dim light of my flashlight to make out anything. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Is someone in here?" There was a moment of silence. The only sound was the rain tapping against the roof, but then, just as I thought maybe I was imagining things, I heard it. A soft, strained voice. It came from the far corner of the shed, barely above a whisper. "Help me." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The voice was weak, but it was real. I took a cautious step forward, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. There, in the corner, I saw movement. A figure hunched down, its head bent, shoulders shuddering. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell they were sitting on the floor, almost curled up in a ball. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" There was a long pause before the figure responded, but when they did, it was in a low, raspy voice that sent a shiver down my spine. "I need to stay here. Please. Don't make me leave." I stood there, staring at the shape in the corner, trying to make sense of what was going on. I had so many questions, but I didn't know how to ask them. Who was this person? How had they gotten in? Why were they hiding in my shed in the middle of a storm? What do you mean? What are you doing here? I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and confusion. They didn't answer right away. Instead, they shifted in place, and I heard the scrape of metal on the floor. My flashlight flickered again, and I realized they were holding something in their hand, something long and metallic. A knife, maybe? The fear that had been building inside me turned to panic. I should have run, I should have turned and left the shed, but for some reason, I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching as the figure straightened up. You have to help me, they said, their voice now louder, more urgent. I can't go back. Please. I can't go back. I had no idea who they were or what they were talking about, but I knew I couldn't stay. Something was wrong. It felt wrong. This was no stranger asking for help. This was something else, something darker. I turned to leave, my heart racing in my chest, when the figure suddenly moved toward me. They stumbled, dragging themselves across the floor. I was too slow to react, and before I knew it, they were standing in front of me, blocking the door. You can't leave. I need you to stay, they said, their voice now frantic, desperate. I didn't have a choice. I was trapped in the small shed, the door behind me blocked. My only option was to get past them. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing my phone, but before I could pull it out, the figure lunged. I don't know how I did it, but I pushed them back with all my strength. They stumbled, and for a split second, I thought I might have a chance. Without thinking, I bolted out the door and into the rain. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't stop running until I was inside the house, locking the door behind me. I called the police right away. When they arrived, they found nothing in the shed. No person, no evidence of anyone being there. But they did take a report. They checked the area, but they didn't find anything suspicious. They said I must have imagined it, that the storm was playing tricks on my mind. I haven't been able to shake the feeling, though. Every time it storms, I hear that voice in my head. Please, don't make me leave. It doesn't go away. Whoever that person was, and whatever they wanted, I don't think they were really asking for help. And that thought still haunts me every time the rain starts to fall. I'll start by saying that I never wanted to be in that basement. Ever. I never asked to be there. But that night, everything changed. It had been raining heavily for days, and the forecast predicted another storm. I had just moved into the house, a quiet, somewhat secluded place on the edge of town. The house was old, but I loved it. It was the kind of place you could picture yourself growing old in, with a big front porch and an overgrown garden in the back. It had character, sure, but it was perfect for me. At least, that's what I thought. It wasn't long before I noticed the flooding. I started to hear strange sounds from the basement, but I ignored them at first. Old houses make noise, right? The first time I went down there, I was just going to check on some boxes I had shoved to the back. When I opened the door, the damp smell hit me. Not unusual, I thought. It had been rainy, and the basement was always a little musty. The next morning, I went down again to grab a few things, and that's when I saw the water. It was only a couple inches deep, but enough to make me uneasy. The storm wasn't supposed to hit until later, but it seemed like the house had taken on more water than I realized. I went back upstairs to grab towels and a mop, trying to get ahead of it before it became too much. By the time I returned, the water had risen even higher. Panic set in, but I kept calm. I started moving the boxes, books, and some of the furniture that had been left in the basement when I moved in. There were some family heirlooms I didn't want to lose. The water was getting colder, creeping into the edges of the room. It was clear the basement had some drainage issues, but it was too late now to worry about that. I was kneeling, shifting one of the boxes, when I noticed something odd. A section of the wall near the back of the basement was different. The wood looked slightly darker, almost like it had been exposed to water more than the rest of the walls. There was a small gap at the bottom, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make me curious. I stood up and moved toward it, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The water lapped at my boots as I knelt down to inspect it. My fingers brushed the edge of the wall. It was strange, cold to the touch, and slightly damp. I pushed against it with more force than I meant to, and the panel shifted. I froze. Behind the panel, there was a small space. I wasn't sure if it was a mistake or something intentional, but it looked like the wall had been covering a hidden door, one I hadn't noticed when I moved in. My breath caught in my throat, and I suddenly didn't know if I wanted to open it. But I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed the edge of the panel, pulled it out, and revealed the dark opening behind it. The air felt colder, and the basement seemed to get quieter somehow. The rain outside was still coming down hard, but it almost sounded muffled in comparison to the silence in the basement. I found a small wooden door, old and warped. There was no handle, but there were markings on the wood, deep gouges, almost like something had scraped along the surface for a long time. I hesitated, staring at the door. Something about it felt off, but I pushed past the feeling and grabbed the edge, pulling it open. It creaked loudly as it moved, and my stomach dropped. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. The air in there was musty, stale, and so cold it made my skin crawl. I didn't want to go inside, but I couldn't look away. There was something about it that pulled me in, like it was waiting for me. I stepped inside. The room was tiny, barely big enough for a few people to stand in. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, just some old, rotting furniture and dust everywhere. But then I saw them items scattered around the floor. Old, strange objects that didn't belong there. I didn't know what to make of it at first. Some of it looked like trash, old papers, broken glass, but there were others, things that I couldn't explain. There was a chair in the corner, stained with something that wasn't just dirt. My heart raced as I looked closer at the items. On the floor next to the chair, there was a small, old-fashioned mirror. It was cracked, but there was something about it that made me feel uneasy, like it was watching me. My mind was starting to race, trying to make sense of everything. I stepped back, my body trembling. Something told me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. In the middle of the room, there was a small, worn wooden box. I approached it slowly, not sure if I really wanted to open it, but I did. Inside, there were more things, more disturbing items, a handful of dried flowers, a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, and something wrapped in an old, dirty cloth. I unwrapped the cloth, and that's when I found it. A small, rusted key. It was so old that it looked like it shouldn't even exist anymore. My hand shook as I held it. But the more I stared at it, the more I realized that this was no random collection of forgotten belongings. It was deliberate. Someone had placed everything here, and it was meant for someone, maybe me, to find. I stood there, still holding the key, the dark room pressing in around me. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't stop staring at the key. And then, just as I was about to step back, I heard it. A noise. From upstairs. A door creaked, followed by footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps. Someone was in the house. Someone who shouldn't have been. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the key, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned and bolted toward the door. but as I reached it, I glanced over my shoulder. I couldn't stop myself. The chair in the corner was different. Someone had moved it. It wasn't where I had left it. I didn't wait. I ran back upstairs, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't even bother to check the water in the basement. The flooding, the room, the key, it all seemed too real, too horrifying to comprehend. I got out of the house that night. I called a friend to pick me up and never went back. The place was left behind, and I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I still wonder who lived there before me, and what they were hiding. And, more than anything, I wonder if they're still watching from that dark room. I'm a bus driver, been doing it for a few years now. I've always kept to myself, focused on the job. The route I drive isn't anything special. It's mostly local commuters, a few regulars, some tourists. I've gotten used to the faces, the people who get on and off at their usual stops. It's a predictable job, and I liked it that way. That was, until I noticed him. It started out normal enough, just another day at the wheel, but there was this one guy. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, always wearing a jacket and jeans, even on the hottest days. I couldn't tell much about his face. He always kept his head down, usually staring at his phone or a book, but I'd see him from the rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then it became weird. Every time I looked in the mirror, I'd see him sitting in the same seat, right near the back, a few rows from the exit. He'd get on the bus at the same stop, at the same time, and he never got off. The other passengers would get off at their stops, a few people would board, but this man? He stayed. He stayed for the whole route. At first, I thought maybe he had nowhere to go or was just lost in thought. But after a few days of it, I started getting this feeling in the pit of my stomach. He never spoke to anyone. He never even moved from that seat unless the bus made a stop. And even then, it was just a slight shift in his posture, as if he was making sure no one took the seat beside him. One night, I was driving the last shift, and I noticed that he was still there, sitting in the back. The bus had emptied out, everyone else had gotten off, but not him. I was doing my usual check, making sure no one had left anything behind, when I glanced in the mirror. He was watching me. Not in a subtle way, but in a way that felt almost too obvious. I looked away, pretending I didn't notice, but I could feel his eyes on me. The thing is, I wasn't sure what made me more uncomfortable, the fact that he was still there, or the fact that I couldn't remember when I had started noticing him. The next day, I was on the same shift, driving the same route. There he was again. Same jacket, same spot. It was like clockwork. I didn't think much of it at first, but this time, I could see him watching me more closely, almost like he was waiting for something. His eyes weren't wandering like they usually did. They were fixed, staring straight at me through the rearview mirror. I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself it was nothing. But by the third day, I was starting to feel paranoid. He hadn't missed a single shift, and he hadn't gotten off once. One afternoon, I decided to take a different route. It wasn't a big change, just a small detour, but enough that it would make the ride a little longer. The guy didn't budge. He was still sitting in the same spot, his eyes still locked on me through the rearview mirror. It made my skin crawl. The last stop before I was supposed to turn around is always quiet, a residential area, usually just a couple people getting on or off. But that day, when I glanced up at the rearview, I saw him stand up. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought he was finally getting off, but then he just walked to the front of the bus. I stopped the bus, confused. I waited for him to get off, but he just stood there. Not looking out the window, not doing anything. He was just standing there, staring at me. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. No answer. He just stood there, staring. The moment felt like it stretched on forever. I felt a cold sweat forming on my back, a nervous knot in my stomach. Why wasn't he leaving? Why wasn't he getting off the bus? Is there a problem? I asked again, my voice a little shaky. He didn't speak. He just took a step closer, moving toward the driver's seat. "Hey," I said, trying to stay calm, "you need to sit down." But he didn't listen. He was almost beside me now, and I could smell his cologne, something cheap, overpowering. I could feel him right behind me. Then, just as I was about to say something else, he spoke. "You're driving the wrong way," he said, his voice low, almost too quiet for me to hear over the hum of the bus engine. I didn't know what to say. What?" I stammered. He leaned closer, and I could see the faintest smile on his face. "You're supposed to go the other way," he said again. The tone in his voice, the calmness, made my chest tighten. I didn't know what he meant, or if he was just messing with me, but I could feel something wasn't right. I pulled the bus over to the side of the road, pretending to check the route. He still didn't move, still standing next to me, watching. I could hear his breath now, soft and steady. And that's when I saw it, something glinting in his hand. A knife. My heart stopped. I froze, too scared to move, but just enough awareness in me to know that I had to act fast. "Is there something I can help you with?" I asked, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. He didn't answer, just kept his eyes locked on mine, his grip tightening around the knife. I knew I had only one option: get away. I made a snap decision. I grabbed the radio, hit the button, and called for help. It wasn't until I saw his face change, his eyes narrowing, that I realized what had just happened. He knew. He knew I'd called for help. I wasn't sure if he was going to attack or leave, but when I heard sirens in the distance, he made a sharp turn and bolted off the bus without a word. I didn't wait. I locked the doors, called the police, and stayed in that bus until they arrived. They found nothing when they searched the area. No trace of the guy. I'm still driving, but I haven't seen him since that night. Every time I look in the rearview mirror now, I feel like I'm waiting for him to be there. Just sitting in that same spot, staring at me. But every day, he's not. We decided to go hiking on a Friday. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip, just 4 of us, me, Danny, Claire, and Joel. The trail was tucked deep in the woods, far from any towns or cell service. Joel picked it because it was supposed to have some amazing views, and we were all up for an adventure. We packed our gear, food, and tents, ready for 2 nights of camping. The first day was fine. The trail was narrow, winding through dense trees, with little clearings where we'd stop for water or a quick snack. We laughed, took pictures, and talked about how nice it was to be away from everything. Danny was the jokester of the group, always messing around and teasing Claire about her fear of bugs. By the time we made it to the first campsite, the sun was setting. We set up our tents, made a small fire, and ate while the sky turned dark. That night, as we sat around the fire, we thought we heard something in the woods. It was faint, like a twig snapping, but it made us all stop talking. Joel said it was probably an animal, maybe a deer. We laughed it off, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. The forest was too quiet. No birds, No crickets, just the occasional rustling of leaves. The next morning, Danny was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, his boots were gone, and so was his backpack. At first, we thought he'd just gone to use the bathroom or explore, but as the hours passed, we started to worry. Joel and I searched the area, calling his name, while Claire stayed by the camp in case he came back. There was no sign of him. No footprints, no gear left behind, nothing. By midday, Joel suggested we pack up and head back to the car. He said maybe Danny had gotten lost and somehow found his way back to the trailhead. Claire was panicking, saying we should call for help, but our phones didn't have any signal. We agreed to hike back, figuring we could alert someone once we were closer to town. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. The trail felt different on the way back, like the trees had closed in. Joel noticed it too. He kept checking the map, muttering that it didn't make sense. The path seemed longer, or maybe we were just more on edge. Then we found the first clue. A water bottle, half full, sitting on the edge of the trail. It was Danny's. He had a specific brand he always carried. Claire picked it up and started crying, saying he must have come this way. But why would he leave it behind? Joel tried to stay calm, saying it could have fallen out of his bag. An hour later, we found his bandana tied to a low branch. That was when Joel started to get nervous. "This isn't right," he said. He wouldn't just leave his stuff like this. We decided to keep moving, faster this time, but the trail seemed to stretch on forever. Around dusk, we found his boot. Just one, lying in the middle of the path. The laces were still tied, but it was dirty, like it had been dragged through the mud. Claire broke down again, saying we needed to stop and wait for Danny. Joel and I argued with her, saying it was safer to keep going. We didn't want to be stuck out there another night. That was when we noticed something. The boot had marks on it, like it had been scratched or clawed at. But they weren't from an animal. They were too deliberate, too clean. Joel and I exchanged a look but didn't say anything to Claire. We just told her to keep moving. As the sun went down, we found more clues. A ripped strap from Danny's backpack, a trail of granola spilling across the dirt. Each piece felt like a breadcrumb, like someone was leading us somewhere. I started to hear things, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but every time I turned, the woods were empty. Joel was tense, his hand gripping the strap of his pack like he was ready to swing it at someone. We decided to stop for the night when it got too dark to see. Claire was a mess, whispering that something was wrong, that we should have stayed at the first campsite. Joel tried to reassure her, but I could see the fear in his eyes. None of us slept. We just sat there, listening to the forest. Around midnight, I saw movement. Just a shadow, darting between the trees. I nudged Joel, and he saw it too. We didn't wake Claire, not wanting to scare her more, but we stayed up, gripping sticks like they were weapons. The shadow didn't come closer, but it didn't leave either. It just circled us, staying just out of reach. By dawn, we were ready to run. We packed up as quickly as we could, dragging Claire along as she sobbed. The trail was easier to follow in the daylight, but the woods felt wrong, like they were watching us. Then we found Danny's other boot. It was on the trail, facing us, like it had been placed there. Joel picked it up and froze. Inside was a piece of paper, folded tightly. He opened it, and his face went pale. I grabbed it from him and read the message. It was written in blocky, uneven letters, "You're next." That was it. We ran. We didn't care about staying quiet or conserving energy. We just ran, crashing through the underbrush when the trail twisted too much. I didn't look back, not even when I heard Claire scream. Joel stopped to help her up, but I kept going, yelling for them to hurry. We made it back to the car just as the sun was setting. The lot was empty, and Danny's car was still there, untouched. We piled into Joel's car and sped out of there, not saying a word until we hit the main road. We reported everything to the police, but they didn't find anything. No sign of Danny, no evidence on the trail. It was like he had vanished. They said it was probably an animal attack or that he'd gotten lost, but I know that's not true. Someone was out there, watching us, leading us, playing with us. And they're still out there. I was driving home late at night, a long stretch of highway that seemed endless. The gas light came on around 11:30 p.m., and I knew I had to stop. There wasn't much out there, just dark fields and the occasional distant farmhouse light. When I saw the sign for a gas station a few miles ahead, I felt relieved. The place looked run down when I pulled in. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed above the pumps, casting a weak light. There was an old pickup truck parked near the building, but I didn't see anyone around. The station itself was a small convenience store with large windows, though most of the shelves inside looked half empty. A man was sitting behind the counter, leaning back on a stool. I got out of the car and started pumping gas. The whole time, I felt uneasy. The air was too still, and the only sound was the faint hum of the pump. I tried to shake it off. It was late. I was tired, that was all. But then, as I was finishing up, I noticed the man behind the counter watching me. He hadn't moved, but his eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. When the pump clicked off, I went inside to pay. The door jingled when I pushed it open, and the man sat up a little straighter. He was middle-aged, with thinning hair and a stained shirt. His smile was too wide, too forced. "Evening," he said, his voice low and scratchy. "Hi," I replied, placing a 20 on the counter. "Pump 2. He didn't take the money right away. Instead, he glanced at the door, then back at me. "Travelin' late, huh?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Just heading home." He nodded slowly, still not touching the money. "Not much traffic out this way at night." I didn't respond. His gaze was heavy, like he was sizing me up. Finally, he took the 20 and rang me up, but he was moving slower than anyone I'd ever seen. He pressed a few buttons on the register, then stopped, looking over his shoulder. "You need anything else?" "Snacks." "Coffee?" he asked. "No, I'm good. Just the gas." "You sure?" "We got fresh coffee in the back," he said, pointing vaguely toward a corner of the store. "I'm sure," I said, stepping back toward the door. He didn't like that. His smile faded, and his eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait here a minute," he said, reaching under the counter. My stomach dropped. I thought he was reaching for a weapon, but instead, he pulled out a cordless phone. He turned away from me and dialed a number, speaking quietly. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to make my skin crawl. "She's here now," he said. There was a pause, then, "Yeah, just one. Car's outside." He glanced at me over his shoulder, his expression blank. I tried to act like I wasn't paying attention, but my hands were shaking. He hung up the phone and turned back to me, his smile back but tighter now. "Something wrong?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. "No," I said quickly. "I should get going." "Thanks." I started to back away, but he stepped out from behind the counter, blocking the door. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You should wait," he said. You said you were tired, right? Could be dangerous driving like that. I'm fine, I said, trying to sound firm. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to stay calm. He took another step closer, and I realized how much bigger he was than me. No need to rush. Why don't you sit down for a bit? I got some chairs over there. He nodded toward a corner of the store, but I didn't even glance in that direction. I really need to go, I said, edging toward the door. My hand brushed against a display of chips, and the crinkling sound seemed deafening in the silence. He didn't move for a moment, just stared at me like he was deciding something. Then, suddenly, the phone on the counter rang. The sharp sound made us both jump. He hesitated, then turned to answer it. Yeah, he said into the receiver. His voice was low again, but I didn't wait to hear the rest. The moment his back was turned, I bolted. I shoved the door open so hard it hit the frame, the jingle of the bell ringing in my ears as I ran to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys, and I could hear the door of the station slam open behind me. Hey, he shouted. I got the door unlocked and jumped in, slamming it shut just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window, yelling something I couldn't understand. My fingers shook as I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. I threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting the pump as I sped out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, his face twisted in anger, watching me drive away. But then I saw something else. Another set of headlights appeared, coming down the road toward the station. A large truck, moving fast. It pulled into the lot just as I turned onto the highway. I didn't stop driving until I reached a well-lit truck stop about 20 miles away. I parked near the entrance and locked all the doors, my hands still shaking. When I looked at my phone, I realized I hadn't even thought to call the police. I reported it later, gave them the address of the station and described the man. But when they went to check, they said the place was abandoned. The building was still there, but the pumps were dry, and the store was empty. They said it hadn't been in business for years. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I'll never forget the look in his eyes. And I'll never stop at a gas station like that again. It was one of those nights where the rain never stopped. The sky had been a thick, dark blanket of clouds all evening, and it seemed like the storm was only getting worse. The kind of rain that makes everything feel damp, even when you're inside. The roads were slick, and I could barely see through the windshield. The wipers worked overtime, but they still couldn't keep up with the downpour. I had one last stop before I could head home for the night. A delivery for a house out in a quiet neighborhood. The GPS said it would only take a few more minutes, so I pressed on, hoping to finish quickly and get out of the storm. The house was on a quiet street, the kind of place you'd expect to find only a few houses with lights on. I pulled up to the curb, careful not to splash the puddles that had formed along the edge of the road. The porch light was on, and there was a package sitting on the doorstep, already slightly soaked from the rain. I grabbed the package, stepped out of the van, and hurried up to the door, hoping I wouldn't get drenched. As I placed the package down and rang the doorbell, I noticed something odd. The blinds were pulled back, and there was a figure standing just inside the window, watching me. I couldn't see much, just the silhouette of a person. I thought nothing of it at the time. I'd seen that before. People were curious about their packages. I turned to leave, but as I reached the van, the porch light flicked off. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it. I still had one more stop to make before heading home. But then, just as I was about to get back into the van, I heard the door behind me creak open. I turned around to see a man standing in the doorway, his face shadowed by the overhang of the porch. He looked normal enough, nothing out of the ordinary, at least at first glance. But the look in his eyes, it was unsettling. "Did you just leave something on my doorstep?" he asked, his voice sharp and filled with suspicion. "Yeah," I replied, my hand still on the van door handle. "A package. For Mr. Hartley, right?" His eyes narrowed. "That's not my package. I didn't order anything." I was taken aback. "It's for this address," I said, showing him the label on my phone. "It's right here. Mr. Hartley." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, cutting me off. "You've stolen it. You're trying to steal my package." I blinked. "What?" "No, I didn't." Before I could say anything else, he stepped out onto the porch, blocking my way to the van. I felt a chill run down my spine. His whole demeanor had shifted from confused to outright hostile. "I want you to prove it. Come inside and show me the receipt or whatever you have. Prove you didn't steal my package." I didn't know what to say. It was a strange request, but I knew I needed to get out of there. "Look, I'm just a delivery driver. I leave the packages at the door. I don't handle the receipts or anything." He wasn't having it. "I don't care. I want you inside now." I felt a rush of panic. There was something off about this situation. I could sense it, even though I didn't know exactly what was wrong. He wasn't acting like someone who just wanted to sort out a misunderstanding. He was angry, almost too angry. "Please, just let me go," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I can call my supervisor if you need confirmation. I'm just doing my job." But he didn't budge. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping low, like he was speaking to someone he didn't trust. I said, "Come inside. Now." Something clicked inside me, and I knew I had to get away. I wasn't sure what this guy was planning, but the vibe was all wrong. I quickly stepped back, my eyes scanning the area for an escape. The rain was pouring harder, the wind making the trees sway, but I didn't care about getting wet. I just needed to leave. "Listen," I said, my voice shaking now. "I don't have time for this. I'm not going inside with you." He stepped forward again, his hand reaching for my arm. I jerked back, fear surging through me. I wasn't strong enough to fight him off, and I knew I wasn't fast enough either. "Stop," he growled, his hand now gripping my wrist. "I'll make sure you never work again if you don't come inside." His grip tightened, and panic set in. I could feel my heart racing, my stomach churning. I needed to get away, fast. I yanked my arm out of his grasp, stumbling backward toward the van. "You better not make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice low and cold. He stepped toward me again, but this time, I didn't wait. I turned and ran for the van. I didn't even bother with the door. I just scrambled into the driver's seat and slammed it shut, locking it immediately. I could see him standing on the porch, staring at me, his face twisted in anger. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the van in gear. The tires squealed as I sped away, glancing in the rearview mirror. I didn't see him follow. I didn't see anything except the rain and the flashing of my headlights on the slick, wet road. When I finally got back to the safety of my office, I called my supervisor. I explained what had happened, but he wasn't much help. "It's a misunderstanding," he said. "You probably just startled him. People can be a little odd." But I didn't feel reassured. There was something in that man's eyes, something dark. I don't know what his plan was, but I know it wasn't good. I finished my shift, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The whole time, I kept thinking about that man and the look on his face. He'd wanted to trap me, keep me there, force me inside his house. I didn't know if he was planning on calling the cops or something worse, but either way, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I haven't been back to that neighborhood since. I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting for the next delivery driver to make a wrong turn. It was one of those nights where the rain just wouldn't let up. I had been driving for hours, alone on a long stretch of road that had practically no streetlights. The kind of road where your headlights are the only thing guiding you. The rain was coming down in sheets, and I had to keep the wipers on full speed to even have a chance of seeing through the windshield. It was already late, and I was exhausted, just trying to get home. I don't know exactly what made me look up, but something caught my eye, a flash of something dark ahead. My heart dropped when I realized it was a truck, flipped over, blocking the road. I wasn't expecting to see that in the middle of nowhere. The truck had clearly been in a bad accident, and from what I could make out, it was badly damaged. I could barely see the outline of the vehicle through the rain, but the shape was unmistakable. I slowed down, pulling my car off to the side of the road. There was no other traffic, no sign of any other drivers. The road was empty, and the storm had swallowed up the world around me. My first instinct was to stop, check for survivors. If there was anyone left alive in that wreck, they'd need help. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but I didn't have much of a signal. It was too spotty in that area. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. It was a wreck. I needed to help, but I wasn't going to be able to do much alone. I got out of my car, feeling the cold rain soak through my jacket. The air smelled like wet asphalt and something else, something sour. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made my stomach turn. As I got closer to the truck, I saw that it had completely overturned, lying on its side in the mud. The driver's side was the most damaged, crushed up against the ground, while the passenger side was barely visible. The rear of the truck was still intact, though. I couldn't see anyone inside. The truck's engine was still running, the headlights flickering weakly. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I made my way around to the driver's side. I called out, but no one answered. My heart was beating a little faster now, but I pushed it aside. There had to be someone, right? Someone in need of help. I reached the driver's side and tried the door, but it was jammed shut. I couldn't open it, and the windows were too dark to see through. I tried the other side of the truck, thinking maybe I could get in that way. That's when I noticed something strange, a strange, pungent smell coming from the back of the truck, mixed with the wet earth and rain. It wasn't until I rounded the back of the truck that I saw it clearly, rows of cages stacked inside. I froze. There were people in those cages. At first, I thought they were just unconscious, or maybe in shock from the crash. But as I stepped closer, I realized with sickening clarity that they were alive. Their eyes were wide, some of them were shaking, and they were all locked in place. I couldn't tell if they were bound with ropes or chains, but their arms and legs were clearly restricted. I felt a wave of nausea, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. I stood there, staring at them, the reality of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just an accident, it was something worse. Much worse. I looked back at the truck's cab, wondering who the driver was, but there was no sign of anyone. No one had come to check on these people. I reached into my pocket for my phone again, trying to get a better signal to call 911, but it was useless. The signal was still terrible. I was standing there, trying to think, when I heard a sound. Footsteps. I quickly ducked behind the truck, my heart racing. I was so focused on the people in the back that I didn't hear them coming. It was two men, walking toward the truck, talking in low voices. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could hear their voices, and the tone wasn't friendly. They were laughing about something, but I didn't understand what. The rain was too loud. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't spot me. I didn't know if they were the ones who had been driving the truck, or if they were involved in whatever this was, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden for much longer. I was terrified. I had no idea what to do. One of the men reached the truck first. He was wearing a raincoat, but the dark silhouette of his figure made him look even more menacing. The other man was behind him, walking toward the cages in the back. I pressed my back flat against the cold metal of the truck, praying they wouldn't turn around and see me. The first man opened the back of the truck with a sharp, metallic sound. I heard the rattling of the cages. The other man's voice rose up, something about checking the cargo. They weren't talking about the crash. They were talking about the people in those cages like they were nothing more than goods to be moved. I had no idea what to do. I had to help them, but if I moved, I was risking everything. I had no way of knowing if these men were armed or if they'd hurt me. I looked around quickly. The road was still empty, and there were no other houses for miles. I couldn't count on anyone else coming. I could feel the panic starting to rise again. My hands were trembling, and I didn't know how much longer I could stay quiet. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave without calling for help. The phone was useless, but I had to get away from these men first. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was then that I heard the men talking again. One of them had opened a phone, and I heard a voice on the other end. They were discussing something about moving the cargo. It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't an accident. This was a plan. A sick, twisted plan. I slowly backed away, my eyes never leaving them. When I got far enough to where I thought they wouldn't hear me, I turned and ran as quietly as I could. I didn't look back until I got back to my car, and even then, I was afraid they might be following me. I didn't stop until I was in a safer area with better cell service. I finally called the police, but by the time they arrived, the truck and the men were gone. There was no trace of them. They must have heard the sirens coming, or maybe they knew the cops were on their way. I don't know, but it was gone. The cages were gone. The people, whoever they were gone. I've thought about that night every day since. I can't shake the image of those poor people in the back of that truck, trapped and helpless. I don't know what happened to them, but I hope they somehow got out. I hope they did. I've been camping a lot, and I've always loved the solitude that comes with being in the wilderness. I'm not the kind of person who gets scared easily, especially when I'm out in nature. I usually find peace there. But what happened to me last year, in a remote spot I'd never been to before, has completely changed the way I think about being alone in the woods. It started out like any other solo trip. I found a spot off the beaten path, no one around for miles, just me and the trees. I set up my tent as usual, made a small fire, and started cooking dinner. The air was crisp, and it was quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves. Nothing unusual. Just the kind of peaceful, serene setting I had been craving. That night, after I had eaten and the fire had died down, I crawled into my sleeping bag, tired but content. The night was cold, the kind of cold that makes you appreciate being tucked inside a warm sleeping bag. The wind picked up a little, making the trees sway. Everything was calm, until I heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound, a soft crunch of dirt or leaves. I figured it was probably an animal, a deer maybe, moving through the forest. But then it stopped. Just like that. I froze, listening. Everything went quiet. A few minutes passed, and I tried to settle back down, thinking it was nothing. But then I heard it again. The crunching sound, this time louder. Closer. My heart started to beat faster. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was the wind. I pulled the covers tighter and listened again. There it was. Footsteps. No animal would make that kind of sound. These were heavy, deliberate steps. Whoever or whatever was out there was moving slowly, carefully, as if they were trying not to make noise, but failing. I couldn't help it. I grabbed the flashlight I always keep by my side and unzipped the tent a little, just enough to peek outside. The night was pitch black, except for the glow of my campfire, which had nearly burned out. The light barely reached beyond the small circle around the fire. But in that small light, I didn't see anything. No movement. No figure. Just shadows. I waited a few more minutes, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Probably just a raccoon or some other animal. But the footsteps started again. Only this time, they were closer. A lot closer. I could hear them clearly, and they weren't moving like an animal. It was human, or at least, something walking like a human. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my knife for protection and unzipped the tent fully, stepping outside, shining my flashlight in every direction. The air was still and cold. The footsteps stopped as soon as I was outside, but I couldn't see anyone. No movement. I checked the surrounding trees, the shadows, but everything was still. My heart was pounding in my chest. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The only sounds I could hear were the wind and the occasional crackling from my campfire. There was no one. I started to think I was just imagining things. I was alone. I knew I was alone. But then, just as I was about to go back into the tent, I heard it again. This time, it was behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The footsteps stopped again, and I felt that strange, uneasy silence surrounding me. My instincts were telling me to stay calm, but I was scared. I don't scare easily, but that night, alone in the dark, I felt like something wasn't right. I spent the rest of the night awake, lying there with the knife in my hand, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Every time I almost drifted off, I'd hear the footsteps again. They seemed to be circling me, like whoever it was knew I was listening and was waiting for me to let my guard down. It felt like they were taunting me, getting closer every time, but when I tried to confront them, they would stop, leaving me in a tense, silent waiting game. Hours passed like this. Finally, when the first light of morning broke through the trees, I heard nothing anymore. The footsteps stopped for good. I didn't sleep at all that night, just kept my eyes open, waiting, hoping the morning would bring some relief. And when I finally saw the sun starting to rise, I packed up my things quickly. I wasn't staying another minute. When I got out of the tent to stretch my legs and gather my stuff, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Around my campsite, all the way around the fire pit and my tent, were muddy footprints. They weren't animal tracks. These were human tracks, big ones, like a man's boots. And they were all over the place, going in circles around my camp, getting close to my tent, and then veering off. There was no mistaking it. Someone had been there. Someone had been walking around my tent all night, and I didn't hear them leave. I couldn't make sense of it. The tracks were fresh, but there was no sign of anyone nearby now. No sign of them leaving or anything else out of the ordinary. But the realization hit me like a punch in the gut. Whoever it was had been watching me, and they had been there the entire night, just out of my sight, circling my camp. I don't know why they hadn't done anything else, but the thought of it sent me into a panic. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, not even bothering to make sure everything was perfectly packed. I just wanted to get out of there. The whole way back to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the trees made my heart race. But there was nothing. Nothing but the silence of the woods. I haven't gone camping alone since that trip, and I don't think I ever will again. Even now, just thinking about it, I feel that same chill down my spine. Whoever it was, whether they were just some kind of sick person playing games or someone with worse intentions, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to move silently, how to make sure I never saw them. And I'll never forget those muddy footprints circling my camp, the footsteps I heard all night, always stopping just when I tried to confront them. Something about that situation felt so wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I was never meant to leave. If there's one thing I've learned from that night, it's that the woods aren't always as peaceful as they seem. And when you're alone out there, anything can happen. Anything at all. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully explain this. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm driving through empty stretches of road. It happened a little over a year ago, but I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I've traveled alone a lot before, but this time, well, let me just tell you what happened. It was late at night. I was driving across the country, headed to a small town in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of drive where you're miles away from any real civilization, just long stretches of dark roads and occasional small towns. I had been on the road for hours, and my gas gauge was starting to dip into the red, so I pulled off the main road to stop at a gas station I saw in the distance. I didn't think anything of it. The place looked normal enough from the outside, a small, rundown gas station with one of those old, flickering lights above the door. The only car at the pumps was a beat-up pickup truck with a thick layer of dirt on it. I parked near the pump and got out, stretching my legs and trying to shake off the exhaustion. I noticed the gas station attendant almost immediately. He was standing behind the counter inside, watching me as I walked up to the door. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap. He had the look of someone who'd been doing this job for years, probably in the middle of nowhere for most of his life. His eyes were wide, a little too wide, and he seemed jittery, like he was on edge. I couldn't help but feel a little off just from looking at him. I opened the door and walked inside. He was still watching me, but didn't say anything at first. I grabbed a bottle of water and some chips, then walked up to the counter. He didn't even ask how I was doing or if I needed anything else. Instead, he just looked at me and said, "You need to leave. You need to go. Now." I froze. I thought I heard him wrong. I glanced around, expecting maybe a big storm or something outside. But everything seemed fine. It was just dark, quiet, and nothing seemed out of place. I chuckled nervously, thinking he was joking, and asked, "What's wrong?" His voice dropped low, almost like a whisper. "Just leave. You don't want to be here when they come through." I didn't know what to make of it. I figured he was just some paranoid guy, maybe he had a rough night or something. But the urgency in his voice, the way he kept looking at the window like he was expecting someone, it didn't feel right. I paid for my stuff quickly, thinking I should just get going, but when I turned to leave, I saw a truck pull up outside. It wasn't the beat-up pickup anymore. It was a black SUV, one of those big ones that look intimidating, like the kind of car you'd see in a movie when someone's trying to make a dramatic entrance. It rolled up slowly, stopping just a little too close to my car. I stepped outside, trying to stay calm. My first instinct was to just get in my car and leave. I wasn't looking to get into any weird situation in the middle of nowhere. But as I approached my car, the door of the SUV opened. A man got out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. He didn't say anything, just watched me. I could feel my stomach tighten, a weird, uneasy feeling creeping up on me. I walked faster, trying not to look directly at him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring right at me. My hand was on the door handle when I heard a voice behind me. "Hey!" I turned around. It was the gas station attendant, standing in the doorway now. "You need to leave. Get in your car and don't stop. Go!" His face was pale, almost gray, and he was sweating. I could tell he was genuinely scared. I didn't know what to do. The man from the SUV was still watching me, not moving, not saying a word. I could see that he was just standing there like he was waiting for something, or maybe someone. I got in my car quickly, locking the door behind me. I started the engine, and just as I was about to put it in reverse, the man from the SUV stepped in front of my car. I slammed my foot on the brake, the tires screeching a little as I stopped just inches from him. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms starting to sweat as I stared at him, trying to figure out what to do. The attendant was still standing in the doorway of the gas station, watching us both. He didn't seem like he was going to intervene. He just stood there, his hands trembling. I didn't know if this guy was going to hurt me or what. I considered just driving off, even if I had to run him over, but something told me it wasn't a good idea. I was in the middle of nowhere, in a place I didn't know. The gas station attendant's warning was still ringing in my head, and I wasn't sure I wanted to take any chances. Finally, the man moved. Slowly, deliberately, he took a step back and gestured toward the road. He didn't say anything, but I could tell from the look on his face that he wanted me to go. I didn't need any more encouragement. I didn't wait for him to move completely out of the way. I just threw the car in reverse and sped off, not looking back. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road, my hands still shaking on the wheel. I don't know who those people were, or what they were planning, but I've never felt so unsafe in my life. The gas station attendant's face kept flashing in my mind, his fear so palpable, like he knew something I didn't. Like he knew I had to leave before it was too late. I didn't stop anywhere else that night, and I didn't trust any more gas stations on that trip. I didn't feel safe, and I didn't want to find out what would have happened if I had stayed any longer. I still don't know what they were up to, and I don't think I want to. Sometimes, when I drive alone now, I wonder if I'll ever run into them again. It was supposed to be a simple, harmless adventure. A group of friends, bored with the usual weekend plans, decided to explore an abandoned construction site on the edge of town. We heard stories about it, mostly rumors, nothing solid about it being haunted or dangerous, but to us, it was just another place to check off our list of things to do. None of us thought anything serious would happen. We didn't expect to run into anyone, let alone someone who had been living there for who knows how long. The place had been deserted for years, no work being done on it. The concrete walls were half finished, the skeleton of the building rising up in jagged shapes where workers had clearly stopped. Broken windows, rusted metal, and piles of debris filled the area, making it feel like a ghost town. We thought it would be fun to just roam around, maybe snap some photos for the gram and see what was left behind. It was only supposed to be a quick trip. It was me, Chris, Danny, and Liam. We'd all been friends for a long time, and none of us had any qualms about sneaking into abandoned places. But this was different. We climbed over the gate at the edge of the site, which was easy enough since the lock was broken and the fence barely stood upright. The place felt off immediately, but none of us said anything. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the site, but we figured we'd be in and out before it got too dark. As we wandered deeper into the site, we joked and laughed. The silence was unsettling, though, in a way that didn't feel normal. It wasn't like other places we'd explored. There was something heavy in the air, like the kind of silence you get when you know someone is watching you, even though you can't see them. It should have been a clue, but we didn't listen to our instincts. We were near the farthest corner of the site when we heard the noise. It was faint at first, just the sound of something dragging, like fabric scraping across concrete. I froze, turning to look at the others. Danny had already stopped, and Chris was squinting into the shadows, trying to see what it was. We didn't move at first. The sound came again, closer this time, and then we saw it. A figure stepped into view. It wasn't anyone we knew. He looked like he had just crawled out from one of the ruins. Dirty, ragged clothes, his face covered in a thick beard, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was dragging something behind him. No, not something, someone. A bag, or maybe a tarp, but it looked like it was full of something heavy. We all stood still, unsure of what to do. My heart was hammering in my chest. Danny was the first to speak. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wavering, but she tried to sound confident. The man didn't answer at first. He just stared at us, his eyes cold and calculating, as if he was trying to figure us out. "You shouldn't be here," he finally said, his voice low, almost too calm. There was a strange edge to it, like he was on the verge of something. We didn't move. None of us knew how to react. Was he a squatter? Was he living here, hiding out from something or someone? The air felt thick now, heavy with tension. It was clear that he wasn't happy to see us. "I said you shouldn't be here," he repeated, stepping forward. His eyes didn't leave ours. His hand reached down toward the bag at his side, but he didn't pull anything out. He just kept staring at us like he was waiting for someone to make the first move. I wanted to say something, to explain that we were just exploring, that we meant no harm. But my mouth was dry. I couldn't find the words. It was like the atmosphere had thickened around us, and I was suddenly too scared to speak. Chris took a step back, looking at the rest of us. His face was pale, and I could see him searching for an escape route in his mind. I could feel it, too. It wasn't safe anymore. The man's eyes narrowed as he saw Chris move. "No one's leaving," he said. His voice was much colder now, much more serious. Before any of us could react, he moved quickly, too quickly. He grabbed Liam by the arm, pulling him toward him with terrifying strength. Liam yelled, stumbling as the man yanked him forward, his hand tightening around his wrist like a vice. "Let him go!" Danny shouted, but the man didn't flinch. He dragged Liam with him to the nearby wall, slamming him against it with enough force that I heard a thud echo through the air. Liam was gasping for breath, clearly shocked, but still fighting back. His hands were free now, but the man was still holding him by the collar, pressing him against the crumbling concrete. "You don't belong here," the man said again, his voice cold and final. It all happened so fast. My mind was racing. I wanted to help Liam, but I didn't know what to do. Danny was frozen in place, her eyes wide with fear. I could feel my body shaking, and I couldn't seem to move. The man let go of Liam's collar and pushed him back, shoving him away like he was nothing more than an annoyance. Liam stumbled but didn't fall. The man looked at all of us, sizing us up. He took a slow, deliberate step back, still watching us. His hand slowly came up to his mouth, as if he were considering something. For a moment, there was silence. Then, he spoke again, his voice almost casual this time. "Get out. Now! Before I change my mind." We didn't wait around. We didn't argue. Without another word, we all turned and ran, sprinting back the way we had come. My heart was racing, and I could hear the others behind me, their footsteps heavy on the concrete. We didn't look back. We made it to the edge of the site, where the gate was. I don't think any of us stopped to breathe until we were out of the fence and onto the road. We didn't even slow down until we were far away, standing by the side of the road, trying to catch our breath. When I finally looked at the others, I saw how pale they were. We all knew we had barely made it out of that place, and none of us were going back. The man hadn't chased us. He hadn't shouted anything after us, but I could still feel his eyes on my back. Even now, I don't know what his intentions were, but I don't want to find out. It wasn't just a coincidence. He didn't want us there, and he made it clear. I don't know if he was living there or just hiding out, but whatever it was not a place for anyone else. It's been over a year now, but sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't left when we did. Would he have let us go, or would he have done something worse? I'm glad I don't have to find out. I've been running the same route for years. It's early mornings, just after sunrise, when the streets are still empty and the air is cool. I like the peace of it, the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, my breathing in time with the steady beat of my heart. There's something soothing about being alone with my thoughts. But that morning, everything changed. I was on my usual route, heading down a quieter stretch of the park, when I saw him. He was standing by the sidewalk, looking down at something in his hands. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People are always walking or sitting, especially around the park. As I got closer, he lifted his head and looked right at me. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice a little too loud for the stillness of the morning. I slowed my pace just slightly, not wanting to come off rude, but I wasn't in the mood to stop. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my pace up. I wasn't planning on engaging much. "Do you know where the nearest gas station is?" he asked, still standing in the same spot. His hands were shaking slightly, like maybe he was cold or nervous. His clothes were ragged, nothing that screamed normal. Just a plain hoodie and worn-out jeans, nothing remarkable. "Ah, yeah. Just keep going down the street and turn left at the next light," I said, not wanting to be bothered. I started to pick up speed again, hoping that would end the conversation. But he didn't move. "Actually," he said, his voice quieter now, "I'm kind of lost. Do you know if there's a bus stop around here?" At this point, I was slowing down, not sure how to handle it. He wasn't exactly threatening, but something about his demeanor felt off. He was too still, too intense. And the fact that he hadn't moved from his spot told me something wasn't right. "There's a bus stop about a block away," I said, not breaking stride, trying to give a quick answer and move along. But he wasn't letting up. Can you help me find it?" I stopped. Not fully, but enough that I could look at him. There was something in his eyes, something desperate, almost pleading. The sun was starting to rise higher, casting a warm light on everything around, but I felt a chill run through me. He was standing too close, now taking a step toward me. "I don't know if I can." "I'm just running," I said, my voice tight. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck in a situation where I felt unsafe. He didn't seem to understand. Or maybe he didn't care. "I just need help," he said, his voice quieter now, more insistent. "I'm really lost. It's really important." There was a pause. He seemed to be waiting for something. I felt my chest tighten. My instincts told me to go, to move, to get away, but I stayed. I wanted to be polite. I wanted to help, but something in me screamed to walk away. Still, I wasn't sure what to do. I stood there for a second, trying to find the right words, but the moment felt strange, heavy. He was looking at me like he was waiting for me to do something. I really need to find it. "You're not going anywhere, right?" he asked. What? My heart skipped a beat, and I suddenly felt very exposed. He had no business asking me that. No business asking me anything anymore. I took a quick step back. "I've got to go," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I turned and began jogging again, but before I could even get a few paces away, I heard his footsteps behind me. Heavy and deliberate. Not the quick, light footfalls of someone who's just out for a morning jog like me. I could feel his presence closing in behind me. I picked up the pace, trying to put distance between us, but he matched it. My heart started pounding in my chest. There was no mistaking it now, he was following me. I looked over my shoulder. He was maybe 10 feet away, and he wasn't slowing down. His pace was steady, determined. And now I was scared. "Why are you following me?" I asked, my voice coming out shaky even though I didn't want it to. He didn't answer. He just kept following, keeping that distance, like he was toying with me. I rounded a corner, hoping to lose him, but when I glanced back again, he was still there, just behind me. His gaze never left me. A sudden panic flooded me. I knew I couldn't outrun him for long, and I didn't want to go any further into the park. It was too isolated, too empty. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't even have my phone with me. There was a bridge ahead, a small overpass that led to a busier street. I made up my mind and began running hard, faster than I'd ever run before, trying to reach that bridge. The sound of his footsteps grew louder behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I made it to the bridge, and for the first time, I risked a glance behind me. He was still there, maybe 20 feet back. But something had changed. The look in his eyes was more urgent now, like he realized he'd almost lost me. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I ran as fast as I could, toward the main road where there were cars, people, life. I couldn't risk staying in that park, not with him so close. I made it to the main street and kept going until I reached a convenience store. The door was unlocked, and I rushed inside, breathless, shaking. I looked out the window, but he didn't follow me any further. He had stopped just at the entrance to the park, watching me. And then he turned and disappeared back into the trees. I stayed inside for a while, unsure of what to do. I didn't call the police because I couldn't explain it. Nothing had really happened, right? He hadn't hurt me. He just followed me, made me feel like prey. But it was enough to make my heart race even now, days later. I don't know what his intentions were, but I know one thing: I've never run that route again. I went to the grocery store last week, just like I always do. It was a normal day, nothing strange, and I wasn't in a hurry. I parked near the back of the lot because it was crowded, but that didn't bother me. I kind of like the walk. It gives me a moment to breathe before diving into errands. The store was busy, so it took me a little longer than usual to get everything I needed. When I came out, it was starting to get dark. The street lights in the parking lot were on, but they didn't do much. You know that kind of half-light where you can see, but everything feels off? That's how it was. I walked to my car with my bags in hand, not thinking about much, just going through the motions. I noticed a piece of paper stuck under my windshield wiper when I got close. It was one of those bright yellow flyers, the kind you'd expect to see for a car wash or some event. At first, I didn't even think it was odd. People leave stuff like that all the time. I set my bags in the back seat and walked around to grab the flyer. It was stuck under the wiper pretty good, so I had to tug at it. While I was pulling it free, I heard footsteps behind me. Not the kind you hear from far away, but close, too close. I froze for a second, just holding the flyer, and then I turned my head. There was a man standing there, maybe a few feet away. He wasn't holding anything, didn't look like he worked there, and he didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, staring at me. He looked normal enough, jeans, a jacket, dark hair, but something about the way he was standing made me feel like I was in trouble. "Hey," he said finally, his voice calm but low. "You need help with something?" I shook my head. "No, I'm good. Thanks." My voice came out steadier than I felt, but my heart was starting to race. He wasn't smiling or anything, just looking at me like he was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off, turned back to my car, and tossed the flyer into the passenger seat. When I reached for the door handle, I felt his hand grab my arm. Not rough, but firm, like he'd done it before. My first instinct was to pull away, but he was strong. "You're coming with me," he said. Still calm, still too quiet. His tone made my stomach turn. "No, I'm not," I managed to say, yanking harder. I was starting to panic now, and my mind was racing. He didn't look angry or frustrated, just determined. Like he already knew how this was going to go. I didn't even see the van until he started pulling me toward it. It was parked just a few spaces down from my car, one of those older white ones with no windows in the back. The kind you see on TV and know to avoid. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint, but I knew I couldn't let him get me in that van. I screamed. Loud. As loud as I could. I didn't care who heard, I just needed someone to notice. He didn't flinch, just kept pulling me toward the van like my screaming didn't matter. That scared me more than anything because it felt like he'd done this before, like he knew how to handle it. I kicked at him, struggled, tried to twist free, but his grip didn't loosen. He was dragging me now, my feet barely staying under me. The van's side door was open, and I could see the inside, a mess of blankets, rope, and something that looked like duct tape. My mind was screaming at me to fight harder, but I felt so weak, like I wasn't strong enough to stop him. Then I remembered my keys. They were in my pocket, and I reached for them blindly, my fingers shaking so much it took me a second to get them out. I didn't think, just swung my arm and jabbed the sharp end of the key into his hand as hard as I could. He yelled. For the first time, he made a noise, and his grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I stumbled backward, almost falling, but I caught myself and ran. I didn't look back, didn't even think. I just ran toward the store, where I could see people coming in and out. I was yelling for help, my voice shaking, and a couple of people turned to look. A man near the entrance came toward me, asking what was wrong. I tried to explain, but I could barely get the words out. He tried to grab me. Over there. By my car. The guy didn't hesitate. He turned and started walking toward the parking lot, yelling something like, "Hey, you stay there." I followed behind him, but when we got back to my car, the man and the van were gone. My groceries were still in the back seat, my keys on the ground where I dropped them. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pick them up. The guy who'd come to help me stayed with me until the police arrived. I filed a report, told them everything I could remember, but they didn't seem too hopeful. They said they checked the security cameras, but I haven't heard anything back yet. I still don't know who he was or why he picked me. All I know is that I've never been so scared in my life, and I'll never park in the back of a lot again.